Welcome to your next Chills Before Sleep. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for us to provide you with more scary stories. Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to enable all notifications.
My name is Audrey, a 29-year-old woman. This story took place when I was working from home during the lockdown. I was working as a sales manager at the time in a well-known company and was living alone in my house. I had moved into a new house at the time. It was a big house, but it had been empty for a long time. I had hired an interior designer who had done a terrific job, but I hadn't spent a lot of time at the property. Now I had to live on the property for a long time without the ability to go outside. I was okay with it though. I didn't mind spending time in the beautiful house I had bought. My first day was pretty uneventful. I just got up, made breakfast, and completed some reports. I have to say, working from home was much better than working from the office. Time efficient as well. In the evening, I watched a few episodes of my favorite show and went to sleep. I awoke from sleep to hear footsteps. I decided to go check it out. I was afraid a raccoon had broken inside the house and was helping itself to my groceries. I got out of bed and switched on my bedroom light. I walked to the kitchen and I couldn't find anyone there. I was puzzled. There was no noise anymore. I wondered if I had just imagined it. I must have been really tired. I just switched off the lights and went back to sleep. Every day I would follow the same routine. I was preparing myself for a meeting I had on Monday. I had certain reports to complete. I was so tired. I was really overworking myself. But a colleague of mine named Jackson really helped me. I have to confess, I had somewhat of a crush on Jackson. He was a really nice man, and we talked about going on a date after the lockdown ended. I could tell that he really cared about me. There was something strange happening during this time as well. I was being woken up at night by the sound of footsteps. I had honestly started thinking that my house was haunted, but the rational side of me would not accept that at all. I even considered the possibility of someone living in my house. It was an old house, and maybe some junkie may have been living there. The mere thought of it really scared me, but it was not like I could just book a hotel room for the night. I was honestly scared, and I was regretting my decision of moving in before the lockdown. I shared my concerns with Jackson, and he said that he will help me search the house after the meeting on Monday. I was very grateful to him. I wanted to call the police, but it did not feel right using emergency services in a time when other people needed them more. I reasoned with myself that it is okay because I'm not in any grave danger. The day of the meeting came and I was fully prepared. I was a bit nervous, but I tried to calm myself down. It was a big deal. I was going to be there with all of my superiors, and this meeting would also affect my promotion. I had been preparing for this meeting for a long time, and it was now my time to shine. Thankfully, our meeting was going to be an online video conference. As the meeting started, I found myself being a little scared, but I tried to overcome my nerves. It was also easier because Jackson was in the meeting. It just felt nice to know that someone else was also rooting for me. I went into the meeting and I gave my presentation. It went smoothly. I could see that my superiors were content with it. I felt really happy, and I was not nervous anymore. I had done it. A whole week's worth of hard work had paid off. We were just ending the meeting when I saw Jackson's face grow pale on my computer. "What is that behind you?" said Jackson. I looked behind me, but I couldn't see anything suspicious. I turned back around to face my computer monitor to respond back to Jackson. "There's nothing there," I said, confused. "My bad," he said, still not looking convinced. We ended the meeting and I closed my laptop. I stood up from my desk to get some food. I was so relieved at this moment because I had really nailed it in the meeting. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder.
Now, girlie,"
"Turn around. No funny business," said a voice. I felt my heart begin to pulsate in my chest. I just turned around to see a large, tall man. He had a big frame. He looked like he was on some kind of drug. He seemed very agitated, and I was growing more scared by the minute. "What do you want?" I said. He raised his hand to show a big butcher knife in it. I recognized the knife because he had taken it from my own kitchen. If he wanted to take money, he was welcome to take it and leave. "No, girlie," he said with a maniacal look. "I'm here for you. I want to feel your skin under my blade. I want to feel the resistance my knife tries to chisel through your bone. I want to dice your flesh and cook it, and then I want to eat you up." He looked absolutely insane. I backed away from him, and I tried running towards my room. He ran after me in hot pursuit. I ran to my room and I closed the door in the nick of time. I had no other choice than climbing out of the window. But it was locked from the outside. I didn't know that was even possible. There was a heavy pounding on my door. I can't believe it. I was trapped inside my room with a psychopath standing outside my door, ready to kill me. I had to do something. This couldn't be the end. I was young. I had so much more to do. I didn't deserve to be killed and cut into pieces by some psycho. I was pacing through my room when I tripped over something. I looked back to see a portion of the floor was raised up. It was a trap door. I opened it to see a big basement. I had no choice, and the basement had come to me like some sort of blessing. I entered the basement. It was dark and dimly lit. There was a little lamp in the corner. I turned it on and the room was bathed in dim yellow light. What I saw shook me to my very core. There was an open hole in the ground, about the size of a grave. I also walked forward to examine a closet that was there. I opened it, and what I saw made me let out in a little shriek. There were faces. Faces of women. Actual skin. I knew my scream had alerted the man of my position. I closed the trap door from the inside, so I didn't think he would be able to enter through that. But I heard the sound of someone banging at the opening of the door. A minute later, I heard someone striking the door, as if it was being hit by a hammer. I was scared. I turned the light off and I hid. How would I make it out of this situation? I can't call for help because I left my phone in the office. I felt like if I hid in the room, the man would find me. I decided to sit inside the big hole in hopes to remain hidden. I thought he wouldn't be able to find me here. I heard him as he slowly hit the door again and again, till it gave way. I heard him make his way down into the basement. "Where are you, kitten?" he said, brandishing a knife in one hand and a hammer in the other. I tried to be as silent as I could. "You can't hide from me," he said as he searched the whole room. He looked through the entire room, and about 5 minutes later, I thought he was about to leave, when I heard him say, "I see you've already taken your position," he said as he laughed maniacally. He jumped into the hole with me. I started crying and whimpering, making myself as small as I could, wishing I could just disappear from this situation. He pulled my hair and was about to bring the knife down on my throat. I was crying like a toddler now, tears rushing down my face. That was when I heard an ear-deafening sound. I felt fluid dripping down on my face. I opened my eyes to look up and see the man had been shot in the arm. I looked at his assailant and identified him as Jackson. "Jackson!" I yelled as he shot the man again in the shoulder. The man staggered back and fell. I tried to climb out of the hole, but that's when I felt a sharp pain in my ankle. I yelped in pain and looked at my feet to see that the man had sliced my ankle. The man started to drag me by my hair again. I was screaming in pain. For a moment, I really thought I was going to die that day. That was until I heard a bullet pass near my ear and looked up to see the man dead. Jackson had shot him in the chest. The man's breathing became irregular, then ceased. Jackson rushed over and helped me climb out of the hole. He also had called the cops, and they were on their way. It turns out that the man who used to live there before me was friends with the man who lived in my house. They would both lure women into the house and kill them. They would then cannibalize their bodies, and whatever remained was buried in the basement. They also cut out the women's faces and saved them as trophies. When the man who lived here died, this man started living in the basement because he did not have anywhere else to go. He was also a drug addict and would steal money from my purse whenever he could. The cops theorized that the man would come out and eat and drink whenever I would fall asleep at night and then go into the basement before I'd wake up. He attacked me that day because he knew that Jackson had seen him. The remains that I saw in the closet matched that of lots of women who had gone missing in the last 2 decades. This incident really traumatized me, and I have to go to therapy now. On the other hand, I moved in with Jackson, and we're dating now. I often think back to that man and that fateful evening. I feel very glad that Jackson had come to actually help me. But what if he hadn't been there? Would I have just become another statistic? Would I end up dead in 6 feet under, with a psychopath wearing my face for fun?
My name is David, and I'm a 26-year-old man completing his master's in computer science. This story happened when I was a junior in high school. I had a very tight-knit group of friends at that time. There were 3 guys and 3 girls in our group, including me. The guys were Jack and Nathan. They were my childhood friends, so of course I used to hang out with them. The girls were Lana, Teresa, and May. I was dating Lana at the time, so she had become part of the group, and Teresa was her cousin, while May was her best friend. This is how our little group came to be. Being stupid high school kids, we would often give each other dares. They'd usually be pretty mundane dares, like stealing the chalk from the teacher's table while she was in the room. But once in a while, someone would get dared to do something big and ridiculous. Those are the ones that we still remember to this day. I had never been a believer of the paranormal, so my friends would always make me do the so-called scary dares. They'd ask me stuff like spending a night alone in a cemetery or touching a cursed object. These dares had almost become a source of my side income. Being 16, I felt like I was invincible. I had to find out the hard way that that wasn't true. It was a late November evening when my friends first told me about it. "Hey Dave," said Jack. "So I've got the next dare planned out." It was commonplace to see him to be so excited, especially for dares. It was nothing new. I asked him what it was. He went on to tell me about a fantastical tale, about an old couple who kidnapped and murdered children and teens in a house in the middle of the woods. The dare was to investigate the house and snap a picture of the statues present in the middle of the house. People used to say that the couple had the bodies of the people they killed to build the sculptures, and their corpses are still preserved underneath the plaster. "But," said Jack, "I want to investigate it as well. It sounds so creepy." "Might as well take everyone else then," Nathan chipped in. Lana got really excited on hearing this. "Oh, yes," said May. "Let's make it a group excursion kind of thing," suggested Teresa. I was very intrigued on hearing about this place, and so a plan was made. We set out for the haunted house 2 weeks later, on a fine Sunday morning. I have no idea how we all adjusted ourselves into that one car. It was certainly very cramped. We had packed lunch with us as well. We were really treating this trip like a picnic, and nothing more. We had even told our parents the same. It was a 2-hour journey. As soon as we got near the house, our cell phone stopped working. We knew it was probably due to being in a remote area, but we got a bit spooked nonetheless. Finally, we reached our destination. The house felt like it was out of a horror movie. I had no idea it would actually look scary. It looks like an old, rickety wooden house. The glass windows were broken up. There was a big tree looming over the house like a demonic shadow, making it look more menacing than it otherwise would have. I thought I had seen movement in the top window of the house, but I dismissed it as simple paranoia. I'm sure it would have made a beautiful paradise in its primes, but right now, it looked like a man-made hell. I started feeling uneasy. I think we all did. Nathan was the first to break the silence. Well, its looks sure go along with its reputation. Lana's eyes met mine. I signaled for her to step out of the car, and she did so reluctantly. I stepped out with her. She held my arm in a death grip. You didn't have to see her expression to know just how horrified she was. I'll stay with you, I told her as I stroked her hand in reassurance. She looked at me with a half smile. I'm not going in there, said Teresa. She looked shaken. I can't say I blamed her. Oh, come on. I started, but Nathan backed her. Nah, man, he said as he went back into the car. You all go? I'll stay with Teresa. Nathan definitely had a thing for Teresa. If he had wanted to stay back with her and potentially get some alone time with her, then who was I to stop that? I nodded as I looked back to face the house. I guess it was just going to be the four of us within the house. I was the first to walk towards the house with Lana holding my arm, and Jack and May behind us. I opened up the door and entered it. The interiors were pitch black, even though it was daylight outside. I was scared. I'm not afraid to admit it. I didn't believe ghosts existed, but this was a primal fear, like a fear that had been installed in humans long ago to stop them from becoming prey. There were cobwebs all over the house. I turned on my flashlight. The house had a lot of old rickety furniture. There was also a big portrait on the mantelpiece. It showed a man sitting on a throne and a woman standing beside him. I thought I saw his eyes shift, and it really startled me. Let's just go take the stupid picture and go, Lana said and rushed into the other room. Jack, May, and I followed. We were all really on edge. I was feeling deeply unsettled. The next room had some windows. We were glad to have the darkness be interrupted by a little bit of light that entered the windows, but the one thing that shocked us was that the windows had a lot of fingerprints on them. Children's handprints. Thousands and thousands of them. Lana buried her head in my chest, unable to take the scene in front of her. What the fuck? Said May, holding Jake's hand. There's something seriously wrong with this house, Jake chimed in. Yeah, whimpered Lana. Let's just get out of here, please. Fuck that stupid dare. Jake tried to open the door to the previous room, but it wouldn't budge. I helped him, and we tried to open the door together, but no luck. Do you feel that? Lana asked. What? I asked, confused. And then I felt it. Someone was tapping at wood. But it wasn't the door. Someone was tapping on the wood from beneath the floorboards. Run, I said as I took Lana's hand. We ran to the next room, as Jake and May followed. As we entered the next room, the door shut on its own. We were there in the center of the house now, and the infamous statues were there too. I raised my hand, and with my Polaroid, I snapped a quick photo of the statue. Seriously? Screamed May. I looked at her apologetically. Let's find a way of getting out of here, said Jake. We started trying to find an open window or door to escape through. I was trying to open a blocked door when someone tapped on my shoulder. It was Lana. Her voice sounded low and scared. Do you think that statue changed positions? She said. I looked at the statue. It really had changed positions. When we entered the room, it was in a standing position, but now it was sitting with a hand under its chin. I blinked. It changed positions. I blinked again. It changed positions again. Guys, I said, There's something wrong with these statues. May and Jake turned to look at the statues as well. I was trying really hard not to blink, but I couldn't help it. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, all of my friends were screaming, and I saw the reason. The statue was now hunched over me and had its hand open just an inch away from my throat. I really felt like I was going to start crying now. I was terrified, scared for my life. That's when a small girl barged into the room from the door that had been closed just a moment before. She looked like a completely normal 9-year-old girl, but then she smiled, and as she smiled, her face started twisting. Her smile was stretching all over her face, and her face became completely distorted. She drew in a breath and came out the shrillest sound I have ever heard. We were frozen in shock. A door swung open. She was screaming now, repeating one word over and over again. Leave. Suddenly, the room started becoming physically closer. The walls started closing in for real. I didn't know what to make of any of this, but I knew we had to get out of here. We decided to make a run for it through the door that had opened. It was a narrow hallway leading to the outside. We ran through it. I could feel something tugging at my feet. I looked down to see hands breaking through the floorboards. We were all screaming. I think some of us tripped a few times, but we got back up. We finally made it out of the house. I don't think I've ever felt so happy to feel the sun shining on my skin. We looked at the car. I thought that since Nathan and Teresa had stayed inside, they'd be feeling normal, but there was a look of utter horror and shock on their face. On seeing us approach, Nathan opened the door. We got in as fast as we could, and I told Nathan to gun it. We didn't talk for a long time. I guess our minds were trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. Lana had started crying out of shock. I held her while she sobbed. I asked Nathan if everything had been okay outside, but he informed me that things had been far from normal. Nathan and Teresa had somehow fallen asleep while we were inside, and they had awoken to a horrifying sight. There were dozens of children surrounding the car. They were all pushing the car, almost making it sway like a feather in the wind. Teresa and Nathan were scared out of their wits, but the children disappeared as soon as Nathan heard my voice. We traveled back to Lana's house, and we decided to spend the night there. We were so scared that we opted to sleep in the same room. I have to say, I've had nightmares for months following that night, but it did bring our group closer together. Later on, Nathan asked Teresa out, and they started dating. I was happy for them, but imagine my surprise when May started going out with Jake as well. I was happy for them. My own relationship had blossomed with Lana, and I didn't know this yet, but I would later go on to marry her. I have to say, this incident in the long run helped us to come closer. That day had turned me into a believer for sure. I'm writing this story because I was looking into my old school memories yesterday. That's when I came across the Polaroid I had clicked that day of the statues. I turned it over and I was horrified to see it. The picture didn't have statues. It had children in it, standing in the exact pose that the statues were in, with tears rolling down their faces.
Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, and I'm a 32-year-old man living in Reno. My roommate had just moved out of our apartment, so I was living alone there at the time. I spend a lot of time online. In fact, I frequent a website called Reddit a lot. You might know it. It's getting more and more popular. It was a typical cold winter evening when I got off. I was supposed to go on a date that night, but she canceled on me at the last minute. It was pretty disappointing, but I got on with my day regardless. At the end of the day, I ended up scrolling through Reddit. Eventually, I ended up on a certain dating subreddit. It was a subreddit that discusses and debates dating and its different aspects. While on the subreddit, I commented on one of the posts. It was something about dating standards, and I had described on that post that I had recently been stood up by a woman as well. I didn't really think much about it. I was just about to close the website when I got a notification. Someone had messaged me. The profile showed a photo of a beautiful woman. That was a bit surprising because people don't usually have their real-life photos as their profile photo. She had texted me about the comment I left. "Hey Kevin," said the text. "I'm so sorry you got stood up. Want to talk about it?" I had nothing else to do that night, so I decided I would just talk to the woman for a few minutes. She asked me a few things about myself, but I made sure not to give out any personal details. I had only planned to stay up talking with her for just a little bit, but I had no idea when just a bit turned into the whole night. Then this night turned into weeks. She sent me pictures of herself. She showed me her life. Her name was Vanessa. She was a beautiful woman with dyed red hair and emerald green eyes. I loved talking to her, and it felt like she was someone who really understood me. We decided to meet up a few weeks after. I was really nervous but equally excited. She was a very interesting person as well, and I feel like we got along really well. The day came and we decided to meet up at a cafe. I was so scared, and I must have spent around 15 minutes just psyching myself up to go inside the cafe. But when I saw her, I was completely blown away. She was absolutely gorgeous. She had the most beautiful smile I have ever seen on a woman. I felt instantly attracted to her, and I don't know who wouldn't be. She seemed to have an aura of charm around her. I don't know how she had been single when we met, because any guy would love to be with a girl like her. I sat down at the table and honestly stumbled through the first few sentences. I felt so awkward and nervous at the moment, but then she spoke, and it was like a new confidence had been instilled into me. It was hard for me to not talk to her like intended. The first date led to many more. I loved being with her. She made me feel alive again. But I noticed something. After every date, I would end up feeling more and more tired. I went to several doctors regarding it, but they could never really find anything wrong with me. They just tell me to sleep more, take less stress, but nothing helped. All that helped was her. When she was around, I felt more energized. I felt happier. I felt like I could do anything. But as I spent more time with Vanessa, the time without her started feeling more physically taxing and tiring. After going on dates with her for about 6 weeks, she asked me to go on a week-long trip with her. But she asked me not to tell people. In fact, we had kept our relationship secret from all our peers and family. I found this a bit odd, but accepted it. I really wanted to spend any time with her that I could. I thought I was falling in love with her, and spending time with her made me feel like I was on top of the world. We boarded a plane for Hawaii together. We held hands and she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder as I watched the sun go down. It seemed like a beautiful moment. I wish I could spend my whole life like this. I was so happy. It makes me sad to think about what happened next. When we landed in Hawaii, we took a cab to our hotel. We were kissing the whole ride and snuggling. I felt like we were newlyweds on a honeymoon. We reached the hotel and checked into our room. We then decided to unwind by going to the beach and getting drunk out of our minds. I felt so happy and energized with her. Even being around her really upped my spirits. Every time I stayed away from her, I felt really out of energy. I thought it was weird, but just let it go at the time. I adored her, and I loved her. I loved her with all my heart. We fell asleep and I had horrible dreams that night. I dreamt that night of being eaten alive by wolves and bleeding out on the forest floor.
I woke up the next morning shivering. I was in horrible pain. It felt like I would pass out. That's when I heard her voice. She touched my shoulder and everything felt better. Suddenly, my pain was completely gone. I was relieved and confused at the same time. I remembered waking up for a second and saw Vanessa standing next to the bed, creepily staring at me, but I was so tired that I fell back asleep right away. I didn't talk about it the next morning, and we went hiking for the whole day. At night, we returned back to our hotel room and made love while we showered together. I fell asleep holding her again, but the dreams I had were absolutely horrible. I dreamt again of bleeding out, and that some women dressed in black cloaks were drinking my blood. I woke up feeling horrible. I was feeling groggy and nauseous when I woke up. I had a headache, and I really felt like I was going to pass out. But then Vanessa woke up and touched me, and it felt like all my woes just disappeared. I loved it, and I loved her. However, I had also decided to see a doctor. Every night I would see the most awful nightmares, and every day I would wake up to feel horrible. That is, until Vanessa touched me. The last day of the trip, we spent the whole day surfing on the Hawaiian beaches. We came back to our room and drank a lot. In a few hours, I passed out drunk. Around 4 a.m. in the morning, I woke up to find Vanessa standing over me, staring at me. She looked more rough than she usually does. Her hair looked messy, and her appearance looked somewhat haggard. She appeared about 30 years older than she actually was. And the scariest part was that she was holding a large butcher knife in her hand. I was startled by her appearance. I sat up in bed and looked at her. She had the most menacing grin on her face. "Vanessa?" I asked. I instantly felt ill and nauseous. I was so weak I could hardly move. She just looked at me with a creepy grin and didn't answer. "Vanessa? What's going on?" I asked again. Her grin vanished, and suddenly she looked even more scary, almost like she was possessed. She tilted her head, looked deep into my eyes, and said,
"You give me power. You give me beauty. I need your life force forever."
I quickly realized why I felt so horrible the last few days. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was not the Vanessa I thought she was. This is a demon-looking creature who lives off my energy. She suddenly let out a loud scream as she tried to plunge the knife into my chest. I was absolutely exhausted, but I somehow rolled over and saved myself. She was astonished at this. Of course, this was not supposed to be happening. I mustered up all of my strength and stood up as she tried lunging at me again. There was no way that I would be able to escape through the door. I had to do something quick. I had no idea how I was going to save myself. Then suddenly a thought crept into my head. Our room was on the first floor. Falling from this height wouldn't be lethal. At this time, Vanessa was running towards me with the knife, and I panicked. I managed to leap out the window. What happened next is a blur. But when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with my sister by my side. She had to travel to Hawaii because I was injured severely, and they thought my injuries were intentionally self-inflicted. My sister was very upset with me and she was crying a lot. I tried telling her what had happened, but I saw on her face that she did not believe me. In fact, no one did. Any trace of Vanessa ever having existed vanished. All the pictures were gone, and all the hotel staff said that I had stayed alone in the hotel. She was just gone. This concerned the doctors even more because they were worried that I was mentally ill and had made up Vanessa. It's been a month since the whole incident, and I'm back home again. I'm tired of everything that had happened. All the questions, everything. I even have to go to a therapist now every week. Every day I have a nightmare where my skin is shedding off of my body and my blood is being drunk by cloaked figures.
I'm convinced now that Vanessa was not actually a human. She seemed to be a demon who gained her youth by parasitically binding herself to men. If you ever get a message from a beautiful girl online who seems too good to be true, think twice before you respond.
I'm a 52-year-old widower named Michael. I have 2 daughters, an 18-year-old named Casey and a 23-year-old named Brenda. Their mother died while giving birth to Casey, and ever since then, it's just been the 3 of us. I've tried to date after my wife's death, but I never found anyone who was willing to be a mother to my daughters like my wife had been. My daughters always came first for me, so I never let any woman come into my life. After my daughter Casey went away for college, I was experiencing empty nest syndrome. The house that had been so full of noise and life was left empty as both my daughters moved out. I started to feel the loneliness that I had suppressed for years. And that's when I met Jill on Instagram. I have to say, I'm not the kind of person who dates people he meets online, but Jill had sent me a message on Instagram, and I couldn't help but reply. She was a beautiful woman in her late 40s, and she had 2 sons of her own. I had never thought I would find love after my wife died, but I have to say I found myself falling for Jill more and more every day. We talked every day on the phone, and we had even made plans to meet up. These plans came to fruition one Sunday when I invited Jill for dinner at my place. She was more than delighted to accept my offer. Sunday came and I was waiting at my place with the table set. I had made some pasta carbonara for her and had opened up a bottle of red wine. Around 7 p.m., someone knocked on my front door. I opened it up to see Jill. She wore a long blue dress and her golden hair was flowing down her shoulders. I asked her to come in and she took her seat on the dining table. I had placed a candle and some flowers on the table to make the atmosphere a little more romantic. I was absolutely mesmerized. She was beautiful. I served the red wine and I went to the kitchen to bring the pasta. I came back to see her drinking the red wine and smirking at me devilishly. What followed was some normal conversation about how her day had been. As the date went on and we got tipsier, I even told her about some embarrassing childhood moments. About a half an hour into the date, I started feeling dizzy. "Something wrong, Mike?" Jill asked with a smirk. "You seem ill." I had no idea what was happening. I passed out in a while. When I woke up, I was tied to the chair. I looked up to see Jill and 2 young men who looked like her. I assumed they were her sons. "Up yet, Mikey?" asked the shorter man. They had baseball bats in their hands. I was incapacitated. "Hello, Michael," said Jill. "Happy to have you back with us." They were going to rob me. That much was clear. I wondered whether they were going to kill me as well. "If you cooperate with us, you'll have no problem," said the other man. I was scared for my life. They were already in the process of gathering my belongings and shoving them in their bags when I woke up. I wished that they would just take the things and leave. "Why me?" I asked, looking at Jill. I felt betrayed. I had thought that we had a solid connection, but instead she conned me. "Because you were gullible, enough to fall for it," she spoke as she let out a little laugh. I was heartbroken. How could I have been dumb enough to fall for this? I couldn't believe it. I thought I was going to lose all my life savings. And that is when we heard the lock being opened. Someone was using a key. It must have been one of my daughters. Before the men could react, Brenda had already opened the door and was coming in. She was with her fiancé Josh, and they were both shocked to see the strange people in the house. Now, the thing you should know about Josh is that he was a police officer, and he had a habit of concealed carrying. As he saw the strange men, he took out his gun and pointed it at the men. The men had thought the most they'll have to deal with would be a tied-up old man. They had not prepared for this. They were forced to drop their bats and surrender. Jill tried to sneak away, but Josh pointed the gun at her, and asked her to stay put as well. Brenda opened up my restraints and freed me. I hugged my daughter as she called 911. It turns out that Jill was actually Wendy Miller. She was wanted in 3 states for theft and murder. Her sons also had an extensive criminal record. They used to fool old rich men and con them for money. Some of their victims had not made it out alive. I was lucky enough that my daughter and her fiancé had come in at the right moment. It's been a few months since this happened, and I've already started dating a woman I met in church. Life is better now, and my daughters visit often, but needless to say, I don't think I'll be using social media to date anytime soon. Hello, I'm Dell, and I'm a 24-year-old working in IT. I've always been a shy and quiet kid. I've never made a lot of friends, and I can never really integrate with my high school peers. I always felt a divide, a sense of me and them. As I've grown up, I've become more social and open. I've also given in to peer pressure and opened up an Instagram account. Even though I was never really friends with a lot of people in high school, I have to say it was fun reconnecting with old peers and finding out how everyone was doing. I followed everyone that was in my class in high school, and then I got suggested the profile of Cynthia Matthews. She had been the queen bee of our high school, the most beautiful girl you could ever meet. I have to say, I had a massive crush on her in high school. I checked out her profile. She seemed to be an influencer with a good amount of following. I took a chance and slid into her DMs. I decided to shoot my shot. Any chance you remember an old friend? I texted, giggling about it like a high school girl. To my surprise, she texted back pretty quick. Well, someone sure had a glow up. I couldn't help but blush. Needless to say, we talked all night. She was just so easy to talk to and open up to. And of course, it's fun to talk to someone when you know it was a pretty girl on the other end. We talked a lot the next day, and then the whole week, the whole month, and so on. We'd been talking for 3 months now when I got the invitation for a high school reunion in my emails. As soon as I saw the invitation, I texted Cynthia about it. She said she couldn't be there at the reunion because she was busy that weekend. I really tried to persuade her to go, but she didn't want to. I had asked her to meet up a few times before, but she had always declined. I pleaded with her to come to the reunion, but she said she couldn't. I was dejected, but I couldn't let it affect me. I let the day of the reunion come. I went to the reunion, and I honestly had fun there. I had met some of my old peers and found out who had gotten married, had kids, gone bald, or grown fat. It was honestly fun. I also met one of my old buddies, Blake, there. He had married a Filipino woman and had even had a kid. He asked me if I had a significant other as well. I told him I wasn't really dating anyone, but I had been talking to Cynthia for a while. Cynthia? He said, appearing shocked. Cynthia Williams, our old homecoming queen? I nodded in agreement, trying my best not to smirk. Blake's face went completely pale. He looked like he was about to drop the glass of wine that was in his hand. Dell, he said, horrified. She died 6 months ago. I did not believe Blake at all. I looked back at the Instagram account. All the text I had exchanged with Cynthia were gone. All that was left was her account, and all her pictures were older than 6 months. All the comments on her post were saying rest in peace and mourning her. I was shocked to see this. I had no idea that Cynthia had passed away. I left the reunion immediately because I was suddenly feeling very weirded out. I went back home and tried to search her name online. Sure enough, articles of a car crash started showing up. Cynthia had died 6 months ago when her car collided with an oncoming truck. She had died on impact. I felt solace in the fact that it had been a quick death. I mourned her, but the truth is that I was never able to get to know her. I don't know who I was texting on Instagram. It may have been someone who had access to Cynthia's account, or it may have been Cynthia reaching out from beyond the grave. Even though the latter seems like an insane idea, if I learned anything from this whole experience, it was that if you love someone, you should always tell them before it's too late. And needless to say, I never tried to date anyone on Instagram again. I'm a single mother in her 30s. My name is Kenzie, and I have a 5-year-old son named Lucas. He is truly the light of my life. His father did not want to accept him when I told him the news, so it's just been Lucas and I for as long as he's been in this world. Even though I love my son and cherish all the moments I spend with him, I can't say that I don't feel lonely. Every so often, I'll see a couple being affectionate in public, or hear the news of a coworker getting engaged, and I'll be filled with a desire to find a partner for myself. One Friday, I had the day off from work, and I was feeling lonely again. I had already put Lucas to bed. I had nothing else to do. In my boredom, I opened up Instagram again. I have to say, I've become somewhat of a mommy blogger myself. I used to post a lot being a mother, and especially raising a child alone. I was just scrolling through my feed when I got a message from a person I didn't know. I checked the profile to see a well-built man in his early 40s. His bio said his name was Randy. I checked his message. It said, "Hey beautiful, I love the bond that you have with your son. I really appreciate it." I replied back telling him that I appreciate his compliment. I had nothing else to do, so we got to talking. Randy was a gym owner in his early 40s. He knew what it felt like to be a single parent because he had a 12-year-old daughter and his wife died 5 years ago. I asked him how a man like him had never tried dating again. He said that he had, but his ex had been a crazy woman who had tried to hurt his daughter so she would get full attention. This utterly shocked me. How someone could even think about hurting a child was beyond me. Randy and I really hit it off. We talked every day and every night. It was as if we had electric chemistry. Things were going good. But one day I got another Instagram direct message from a random number. It was a woman. Her profile picture showed a short redhead who looked like she was in her late 30s. I clicked on her profile to see she had about 50 followers and had posted a lot of pictures of herself with Randy. Ah, I thought, this is the ex. The text that she had sent me read, "Back off from my man." I decided to ignore her text, but I informed Randy about this. He told me to just block the number and delete the text. A few weeks passed, and I had gotten over the text. Life was going good, and Randy and I were talking about moving in. One day, I went to pick up my son from school, but they informed me that his aunt had already picked him up. I was confused when I heard this. Aunt? But I don't have any sisters. I asked them to describe her. They told me that it had been a short redhead woman. I instantly knew who it was. My son was kidnapped. I called Randy crying and told him everything that was happening. She must have stalked my Instagram to know which school my son goes to. He gave me the coordinates to his ex's house and told me to meet there. I immediately jumped into my car. It was an old apartment complex. Randy held my hand and guided me through its hallways. Together we stood in front of apartment 303. Randy knocked at the door and said, "Open the door now." The door was instantly opened by the red-haired woman. She hugged him and said, "Finally, you're back. I knew you loved me too." I could see my son sitting on the sofa inside the apartment, so I rushed in to get him. He was happy to see me, and I was so relieved that I felt like I was going to cry. "Go sit in the car," Randy said. I obeyed him, and Lucas and I exited the apartment building. We waited in the car together for about 10 minutes. Then Randy came down. He entered the car and he looked very angry. I didn't say anything for the whole ride back home. When we reached home, he told me that he was sorry and that he will try his best to never endanger me or my child again. This was about 5 months ago, and since then, Randy and I have moved in together and gotten engaged. We're a very happy family, and I have connected well with Randy's daughter. And as for his ex, Randy filed a restraining order against her, and we never saw her again. I'm so glad to have found an incredible fiance like Randy, but I will always be aware of this crazy woman who kidnapped my son and stalked me online.
I'm a 39-year-old janitor. I was working at a high school in a small town. One day I was working in the basement during school hours. No students or faculty were in the basement. That is when I heard an announcement being made on the speakers. The principal said that there was an unidentified active shooter in the building. The school was going on a lockdown, and we were supposed to hide and follow the instructions that we had learned during school lockdown drills. I put my mop back into the bucket and hid in the janitor's closet. I was very sure that no one would ever come looking for me here, so I felt safe there. I sat silently in the corner, not making any sound. It was so silent that I could hear the sounds coming from above. I heard gunshots and people screaming. I was scared. I could hear my own heart racing in the quiet. I was afraid for my life. I was also grateful that I was stuck in such a place that no one would ever even think of checking. But I guess I was wrong. A few minutes later, after the gunshots, I heard a knock on the door. Someone was urgently knocking on my door. "Let me in! Let me in!" said an urgent voice. I could recognize the voice. It was Damien. He was a short kid who was a junior in high school. He had a lot of friends, but he was bullied by the seniors due to his stature. I was relieved to hear a familiar voice. I happily let him inside. He came inside as soon as I opened the door. He looked like he was about to pass out. His hoodie was caked with blood. I was scared to see his condition. "Are you okay, Damien?" I asked. He looked very shaken and out of his element. "No," he said. He looked like he was about to break down crying. "What's happening?" I asked, holding him by the shoulders. I tried to shake some sense into him. "Look at me, boy. Tell me what's going on. Come on, we need to be brave," I told him. "There was a guy upstairs. He shot some people. He shot some seniors," he said, appearing dazed. "Who is it?" I asked. Damien looked at me, his expression unsure. I hugged him to reassure him. "Don't worry, boy," I said. "We'll make it out alive." I asked him to hide behind a shelf. I hid as well. We both stood in silence for a while. Then I could hear police sirens nearby. The sound must have been the sweetest sound I've ever heard in a long while. I saw Damien was crying, and I held him. I thought they were tears of relief. "It's okay," I said as I patted his back. "You're safe now." I heard movement in the basement hallway. It was the police. They announced themselves and kicked open the door before I could open it. They pointed their guns at Damien. I was shocked to see this. They told him to step out, and they put handcuffs on his wrist. I couldn't believe my eyes. Why were they arresting Damien? They took him outside in handcuffs, and one of the officers stayed back to help me. They thought I was being held hostage by Damien. I thought that it must have been a misunderstanding. That is, till I saw the gun outside the closet door. It had blood all over it. I couldn't believe it. I stepped outside the school, lucky to be alive. A few days later, the details were released. Damien had come to the school with an AR-15 and shot the seniors who had been bullying him. He had also shot some other people non-fatally who had tried to stop him. That day he was also going to shoot me, but he couldn't because I had always been kind to him. I mourned the death of the students, and I quit my job at that particular school. I'm a senior in high school. My name is Avery.
and I'm 17. Last week, a pretty gruesome event happened in my school. Before I tell you this, I need to tell you about my friend group. I was best friends with a girl named Selena, and I used to hang out with her boyfriend, as well as their group. I have seen her boyfriend before, but I never really actually knew him. We weren't really close, but I knew him through Selena. His name was Eric, and he had everything going for him. He had good grades, and he was the star player on the football team. He was on track to get into Ivy League colleges with a football scholarship. That was until Eric got into a car crash. He had to get his leg operated on, and the doctor told him he will never be able to play again. In an instant, he lost his scholarship, his friends, his popularity, and even Selena. Most of his friends had been around him because of his popularity, and they went away as soon as the popularity did. Selena left him for the same reason. He couldn't afford going to Ivy League anymore, despite his grades, because his family couldn't afford the fees. The saddest part is that it wasn't even his fault. His friends Jason and Sam had been driving the car that night, but they got off without a scratch. Eric began to isolate himself. He wouldn't even come into school anymore. One day during math class, there was an announcement. The school was going into lockdown. A man had been seen entering the premises carrying a gun. Our math teacher, Mr. Olson, shut the door, turned the lights off, and asked all of us to move to the back of the class and sit down on the floor. We did just that and sat in silence, holding our breath. Selena was sitting next to me, holding my hand. The rest of the football team was also there. I was scared, but at least I was with my friends. I truly thought we would make it out alive, but I was wrong. We heard a loud knock at the door. We all shivered in fright. Then the door was broken down by a large man in a hoodie. Mr. Olson stood up and he tried to stop the shooter, but he couldn't. In turn, the shooter shot his leg. I couldn't help but feel like the shooter had deliberately shot him non-fatally. The shooter turned towards us. We saw his face and gasped. It was Eric. "Hey," he said in a soft voice. We were all stunned. I didn't know what to say. Selena was the first to talk. "Eric, baby, don't do this. She was cut off by a shot being fired. Eric had shot her in the chest. All of her other friends recoiled in terror, but that didn't stop him. "Close your eyes," he said in a low, angry tone. I did as he said. I shuddered every time I heard a shot being fired. Then I opened my eyes after the shots stopped. I looked around me. They were all dead. All of his prior friends were dead. I looked up at Eric. I wanted to ask him if he was going to kill me as well, but I did not have the courage. He looked right into my eyes and said, "They abandoned me." And then he put the gun to his chin and shot himself. I screamed in terror as Eric's limp body hit the ground. Mr. Olson and I were the only ones left alive in the classroom. I started crying. A police officer found us in around a half an hour. He was taken aback on seeing the bloodbath. He gently ushered me out of the room and took me to the hospital. I attended all of my classmates' funerals. I still have PTSD and survivor's guilt from the incident, and I go to therapy. I graduated and left town, but I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what happened on that fatal Monday morning. I am a high school English teacher. I teach literature to seniors in high school. One Thursday morning, I was in my class teaching Shakespeare to bored, uninterested students. That's when we heard a gunshot from the hallway. As soon as we heard that, I knew what to do. I asked all of my students to get under their desk and be quiet. I closed the door and turned off the lights. I hid under the teacher's desk as well. There was an announcement on the PA system.
We could hear someone's footsteps in the hallway. The room was completely still. You could even hear a pin drop. Right then, I heard someone struggling against the latch of the door. The person was putting a lot of pressure on the door. He was about to open it up. That's when I ran from my position under the desk and ran to the door. I threw myself against the door to try to stop the shooter from entering the room. I could feel the shooter push hard against the door, but I wouldn't budge. Then the door went slack. I felt no resistance against it anymore. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I heard a loud noise and felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down to see my shirt was starting to be covered in blood. My students couldn't help but scream. My ears were ringing. I had been shot. I lost my balance and fell down. The person started trying to open the door again, but I heard another shot and the force from the other side stopped. The police had arrived. They neutralized the shooter and got the door open. I was sent to a hospital and operated on. I was very lucky that the bullet had not hit any vital organs. I was discharged within a week, but I still have to go to therapy to this day. Turns out, the shooter was an old employee of the school. In fact, he and I had been friends. He had been fired after many female students had complained against him. He had come back to take his revenge. After this incident, I got a transfer. I've been trying to forget about this incident, but the scar on my abdomen doesn't let me. My name is Levin, a 34-year-old psychiatrist. I was just transferred to work at a new mental health facility. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to name the asylum. My first patient there was Mr. Clarkson. For privacy reasons, I'm using a pseudonym for him. He was a man in his late 30s. He had been admitted into the asylum after he crashed his car into an electric pole, killing his wife on impact. We had our doubts that he was schizophrenic because he claimed he used to see apparitions. The first time I met him, it had been a cold, rainy day. A thunderstorm was afoot. The weather mirrored Mr. Clarkson's mood. I entered his room. He was sitting in front of the window in a chair. He did not look towards me when I entered the room. He did not even turn to acknowledge me. I decided to break the silence in the room. "So?" I started. "Mr. Clarkson?" He did not stir. He did not turn to look at me. "Are you my doctor?" he asked in a very low voice. "Yes," I said. "Why don't you turn the chair around and we can talk to each other?" He still did not move. "No, Doc," he said in a hoarse voice again. "I reckon I'm fine like this." I gave up and sat on the other chair in the room. "So, Mr. Clarkson," I said, "do you want to discuss what happened?" He said. "What do you know, Doc?" I hesitated. He seemed unwilling to open up. "They told me you see a man—" I started, but he interrupted me. "He's here." I was taken aback. "Who's here?" I asked, puzzled. "The grinning man," the man said with finally some emotion in his voice. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked. "All my life." "How far does it go?" "Back to the first thing I remember." "Tell me about it." "I think I may have been around 3 years old. My father was home. He wasn't usually home because he was always busy in the army, but this was a rare moment. My mother and father had taken me to a picnic. They were happy to be together. They were very much in love back then. I was happy to have both my parents be with me. My parents were both talking, but I was picking flowers nearby. I didn't know how, but I went too deep inside the woods while picking flowers. And when I finally came to my senses, I had no idea where I was. I was near a creek, and there were trees all around. I was going to start crying when I saw this scary man with a grin from ear to ear. He was tall, clad in black clothing. All in all, he seemed like a normal man, except for his large grin. It was almost unsettling. It was scary, but I had no other options at the time. I went to the man and asked him for help. The last thing I remember before I fell unconscious was him touching me. My parents later found me. I was sleeping in the middle of a bed of flowers. My father picked me up and took me home. When I reached home, I started telling my parents about the man I met, but they dismissed it because they thought it was just an imaginary friend. The very next day, my old man fell ill. He couldn't breathe, couldn't sleep. We called the doctor, and he said my father had tuberculosis. The doctor said it was treatable now, but apparently it wasn't. Nothing worked. My father died. My mom was a 25-year-old widow.
And do you think the man had anything to do with your father's death? I asked.
Oh, absolutely,
he said, with a great certainty.
He's an agent of death. Every time you see him, someone dies.
I was writing it all down in my notepad. It seems like the man had a long history of mental illness, triggered by the death of his father at a young age. No wonder it had gone unchecked. People weren't accepting of all this ages ago. When was the next time you saw him? I asked.
Well, I was about 12.
He started.
I was playing on the playground with my childhood friend, Emily Kirby. She was a small blonde girl. She had trouble making friends because she had trouble talking to people. She was a very shy and nervous kid. I became friends with her because our mothers worked in the same grocery store. The only difference was that my mother had to work multiple jobs to keep us afloat after my father died. We were talking on the swings when she said,
"Hey, who's that?"
I turned my head to look where she pointed. It was the same man that I saw when I was younger. I came to despise that man. I associated him with my father's death. He was standing across the road in his usual black clothing. He had pale white skin. He had a huge menacing grin on his face, and he had a bag in his hand.
"That's my bag," Emily shouted.
It was true. It looked just like the new bag that Emily's mom got her.
"Mom will be mad if I lose it," she yelled as she started running across the road.
"Emily, stop!" I shouted as I ran after her, but I was too late. I couldn't stop her. I looked up to see the grinning man waving at me, and then a yelp and a crunch later, he was gone. The sight in front of me was harrowing. A big man got out of the SUV and started dialing 911. It would have been of no use, though. I ran to Emily's side. I held her hand and tried to feel her heartbeat, but she was gone. Of course she was gone. The road was painted with her brain matter. And that was the second time he took something I loved.
So far, it seemed like he was having stress-induced hallucinations. How did it get worse? Did you see him associated with other deaths as well? I asked, looking up at him.
"Yeah,"
he said in a somber tone.
"My mother."
He seemed sadder thinking about her than the others, as if he was melancholic in a way.
"He took my mother."
I could hear him sob now.
I was 25 now, and I was working in the city as an editor. I met a beautiful girl named Tina, and love blossomed. We decided to get married a few months later. My mom was so happy when I told her. She was so happy that I was finally starting a family and settling down. And she was so eager to meet Tina. I invited her to come to my wedding. It was a beautiful summer day. Tina looked like an absolute angel in her wedding dress. It was a day I will never forget, but for the wrong reasons. The wedding went off without a hitch. I think it was the happiest that I'd ever felt. Tying the knot with my soulmate. Then came the reception, and my mom got up to make a toast. My mom talked about how it had been just us since my father died. She also told some embarrassing stories about me at the end. She talked about how much she loved Tina and how happy she was that Tina was going to be part of the family. I really loved the speech, but I was really taken out of it when I saw the same grinning man standing behind my mother. I was horrified. I asked Tina if she saw that man, but she gave me a puzzled look because she didn't see anyone. I stood up at the moment to say something, but at the same time my mother fell down, clutching her chest. Everyone surrounded her, and someone called 911, but there was no saving my mother. She was gone. Cardiac arrest. She died as she fell. Tina and I had to conduct a funeral instead of a honeymoon. I spent the first month of our marriage mourning, but Tina was always there for me. She really is my soulmate.
His use of "is" stated that he did not know that his wife was dead. Was that the last time you saw him? I asked.
Oh no, but I wish I had. I really wish it had been the last time. We were 33 when we found out Tina was pregnant. I thought I would never have kids, but I was so happy when I found out. I remember I picked her up in joy and kissed her forehead. We were going to be parents. I knew how bad my luck was. That's why I took extra care of Tina while she was pregnant. I loved that baby before he was born. It was an easy birth, and in just a few hours, Gabriel Marshall Clarkson was born. He had Tina's eyes. He was a beautiful baby. Surely the most beautiful I've ever seen. And I loved him so much. Tina loved him as well, but it wasn't meant to be. We took him home. We fell into the daily routine of waking up, taking care of the baby, and sleeping whenever we could. We were exhausted, but we were in bliss. One day I was in Gabe's nursery. I was sitting in the rocking chair, gently rocking him to sleep. The lamp started malfunctioning. It turned off, and when it turned back on, I saw the grinning man. Just for a second, but it was enough to be embedded into my memory forever. No, I cried out, waking up Gabe. Tina rushed into the room as Gabe began to cry.
What's wrong? She asked, confused.
I saw him, I said. I told her about the grinning man and she said she believed me at the time. But at that moment, being sleep deprived, she got annoyed and told me it wasn't real. She took Gabe from me and told me to go to sleep because I must have been sleep deprived. I told her no. I told her I wanted to stay up all night and keep an eye on Gabe, especially since I'd seen the man. She got mad at me and just told me to go. I guess I wasn't supposed to fight with a young mother. She told me to go sleep and she'll take care of Gabe. I agreed to it, but I shouldn't have. I went to sleep, but I woke up to Tina screaming. I rushed into the nursery and saw Tina crying, holding Gabe. He wasn't breathing. We rushed him to the hospital, but there was nothing the doctors could do. It was SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Just like that, he was taken away from us.
Mr. Clarkson had obviously faced a lot of death in his life. Could his grief be fueling his mental illness? But that wasn't the last time you saw him? I asked. He laughed out loud, but there was nothing funny about it. It was the laugh of a man who was tired of life.
Oh, no,
he said.
After Gabe's death, Tina was a mess. She was a grieving mother, She was inconsolable. She blamed herself for Gabe's death. She was always crying, always sobbing. She just wanted her baby back, and I couldn't give that to her. I hated myself for that. I felt like it was my curse. My curse had taken away my son. My curse had now made my wife a living shell of her former self. That day, I was supposed to take Tina to her grieving mother's support group. While we were in the car waiting at the stop sign, I saw the grinning man standing in front of the pole. This was my chance. I had to end it. I asked Tina if she saw the man, but she said she didn't. I had made up my mind. I was going to run him over. I was going to end it once and for all. Tina was screaming all the way, and she was calling me insane, but I wasn't going to stop. I crashed the car into the pole. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the man's large grin. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. The police came and asked me what had happened. I told them about the man, but they said that there had not been a man. Then, when I got discharged from the hospital, they sent me here. He finally turned to look at me. By the way, where is Tina?
His face seemed old and pale, even though he wasn't even in his early 40s. Oh, I clutched my notepad tight, and I looked at Mr. Clarkson. Actually, Miss Tina Clarkson died on impact. His face instantly fell. He was horrified.
Leave,
he said as he turned back again. Mr. Clark, he cut me off and yelled at me to leave. I got up and left the room because I had told him something big, and I did not want to aggravate him. Mr. Clarkson seemed to just have delusions. The sad part was that these delusions had led to the death of his wife, and almost his death as well. I drove back home that evening and kept feeling uneasy. I drove for a while, and when I reached home, I saw a man in my rearview mirror. The man was tall, with pale skin, and a big grin plastered on his face. I felt unsettled and scared of him. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I felt like I knew exactly who he was, and the doom and destruction he brings. I looked back, but nothing was there. Just then I got a call from the hospital. Mr. Clarkson had somehow smuggled a knife into his room and committed suicide. He couldn't take the news of his wife's death. I was shocked for a moment, but I hoped he was at peace with his wife and son. And as for the man I saw, it has to be a vision, right? I've been working hard, so it must have been due to being tired and sleep deprived. This was not the grinning man, or was he? You want to hear a story, kid? Our camp supervisor asked. All the kids sitting around the campfire gave a unanimous resounding yes. Mr. Jacobs, our supervisor, chuckled a bit and started his story. Once there was a beautiful little kid, just like you all. He was called Caleb. He had also came to camp in these woods, just like the rest of you. The camp supervisor had told them to stay within the camp limits, but you see, Caleb was a daring one. He was a born adventurer, and he wanted to explore the woods at night. Caleb set out at night, exploring the woods with a little flashlight. As he walked deeper and deeper into the woods, he felt like he could hear someone calling his name. In his rational mind, he knew he shouldn't be walking towards some spooky voice in the woods at night. But he felt like he couldn't help himself. Something about the voice was so nice and soothing. It felt unsettling, but comforting at the same time. He felt drawn to the voice. He had lost control over his legs. He could see a large, tall figure in the woods. The figure had his arms outstretched, as if he was calling to Caleb, asking him to be enveloped into his large, loving arms. An ancient dark god who came back to Earth to terrorize his children while showing him his love. Caleb was scared of the creature. It was around 10 feet tall, more slender than any human could ever be. With long, lanky arms and feet, he was wearing a suit. Caleb walked over to him, hypnotized by the figure. Eventually, Caleb touched the creature, and as soon as he did, he felt an overwhelming emotion of fear and despair. The dark god was talking to him, but not out loud. The god was screaming into his mind. It was unbearably shrill, but Caleb could barely make out what he meant. They forgot me, but you will make them remember. I think that's enough, I said out loud, stopping my supervisor, who was also my uncle. I had asked him to stop because he was freaking out all the children. They were 8-year-olds. I don't think they could bear horrifying tales of ancient, dark gods. It felt like they would not be able to sleep tonight at all. Oh, but I have just started the good part, protested my uncle. He was a man well into his 40s, but sometimes it felt like the 8-year-olds camping with us were more mature than him. I dismissed the children and asked them to go back to their tents. It was around 8 p.m., too late for kids to be up. The children got up from the logs around the campfire and went to their tents. I got up and started putting all the food back into their containers. My name is Toby, and I was forced to help my uncle on his camp because he was unable to get someone else. I have never known anyone who has worked with my uncle or anyone who has visited his camp. In fact, my uncle always tried to keep me away from his camp. His full name was Caleb Jacobs. He was my mother's brother. I have absolutely no idea why he used his own name in the story. Seemed like a narcissistic thing to do at the moment. How do you do this every year? I asked my uncle as we both opened a cold one. I was 22, just a little above the drinking age in the U.S. My uncle gave out a dry chuckle and said, "You get used to it, Toby. These kids sure tired you down today, didn't they?" I nodded. I had no problem with kids. I loved them. I probably wanted to have some of my own someday as well. But having to take care of around 15 little kids was one of the most tiring things I've probably ever done. "Why did you use your own name in the story?" I asked him, being curious. "Ah," he stammered. "No particular reason." He seemed to act a bit suspicious, but I let it go. Uncle Caleb has always been a little eccentric anyway. "Well, I'm gonna retire for the night," I said as I made my way to the tent. "You coming?" I looked expectantly at my uncle, but it seems like he wanted to do some more drinking. I went inside my tent and tried to get some sleep. That night I tried to sleep, but I felt like I couldn't get a good deep sleep. In my dreams, I was running away from a large dark god, his shadow enveloping the whole forest. He had his arms outstretched, and he asked me to come to him, but I was petrified. The next morning I woke up to my uncle shaking me. I woke up so confused. My uncle was yelling at me, "Wake up, Toby. The children are gone." That made me sit up all of a sudden. What did he mean the children were gone? How could they just disappear? I gathered myself and asked my uncle, "How many?" 10, he said. I stood up and walked outside of the tent. I checked all the children's tents frantically, and truly only 5 children were left. Where did they go? I was distraught. I was so scared. I immediately thought about what I should tell the children's parents. What do I do now? "You need to go search for them," my uncle screamed at me. I didn't even know what to say. The 5 remaining children stood close to each other, close to where the bonfire had been last night. I took a flashlight from the table nearby, and that's when one of the kids held my hand. "I'm Andrew," he said. "Let me come with you." "No," I yelled. I didn't want more children to go missing. "Stay with Mr. Jacobs." But he wouldn't budge. He held onto my pants and asked to come with me again. I let him. The rest of the children stayed with my uncle. I took Andrew and I searched all of the forest. I tried to look at the forest floor, to look for the children's footprints. I walked for hours before I found any. That made me happy. I asked Andrew to stay close to me, and I sprinted down the path. But they kept going on and on. No kid could have possibly walked so much. After following the footsteps for a while, I came to a clearing, but what I saw completely petrified me. There was a big clearing with no trees, no bugs, just empty lands. And there were thousands of children's footprints, even millions maybe. They had no pattern. It was as if millions of children had been led to that clearing and had simply lost their minds. A small stream ran close to the clearing, and it was running red. Andrew screamed in terror. That was exactly what I wanted to do as well, but I was so horrified that it felt like I could not utter a single sentence. It was as if my mind could not comprehend what it was looking at. It was as if whatever was happening was bigger than you or me. It was something on a cosmic scale, and it was not meant for me to know. I couldn't bear to look at the scene any longer. I took Andrew's hand and I ran back to the campsite. When I was close to the campsite, I saw it, a large, dark god. He was tall and big, and he had no face. He was inviting and comforting. It was as if he was beckoning me to come to them. I walked towards the campsite, and I saw my uncle touching the creature, his body limp, and his eyes glazed over. As soon as I walked closer to him, however, my uncle suddenly woke up and looked at me. All the children were gone, even the ones that were left with my uncle. I looked behind me. Andrew was no longer there. Andrew was now in the embrace of the dark god, and right in front of me. Andrew was melting into the body of the dark god. It felt as if he was losing his existence. He was fusing with the dark god, becoming one with him. I tried to run towards him, but it felt like I could not move. I was stuck to the ground. I could not move. The dark god wouldn't let me. It engulfed Andrew. There was no Andrew anymore. He had become one with the dark god. Then there was a long silence, and there was a bright flash that made me close my eyes. When I opened my eyes, only my uncle was there. "I'm sorry," said my uncle as he raised a knife. I tried to run away, but I couldn't. My legs were still planted to the ground. My uncle was walking towards me with his knife raised. Tears were flowing down his face, but he was resilient and hardened. He had done this before. "I'm sorry," he said. "The story was about me. The god asked me to do this. I called him Slender Man. He asked me to do this. I had to open up a camp and get more children. He said he needed more children. He said he needed sacrifice. It's perfect. No one remembers the children. Even the parents forget that they ever existed. Once the children fuse with the dark god, they become one with him. They're all him now. They're all Slender Man. He lives in the woods. He's feeding. Once he gets enough sacrifice, he'll be strong enough to leave the woods and travel to Earth to get his meal. But until then, I feed him. We feed him." My uncle fell down on the ground. He punched the earth in frustration. The knife was still in his hand. "I pray to God every day, but he never answers. All that is left in our lives is Slender Man. The dark god is upset at us for forgetting him. So now he terrorizes us. He'll never let us forget. Toby, never. And I'm tired." As he said this, he raised the knife and stabbed himself in the stomach. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I felt like I was stuck in place, acting as a statue. I didn't move. I couldn't move. And I couldn't speak. I watched in horror as my uncle bled out in front of me. But he didn't seem like he was in pain. He seemed content. He seemed like he would finally be free from the restraints of what he called the Slender Man. And as I watched every bit of life leave my uncle's body, I saw the long, lanky figure return. After everything, I should have been scared of him, but I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. He stretched out his arms as he came closer to me. He had no face, only pale white skin all over his body. He was not from this world. That much I could tell. As he came closer to me, he asked me to touch him. Suddenly, I could move. I moved my hands, but I could not move my legs. I moved my arm, and I touched it. It spoke to me, not physically, but he spoke inside my mind. And he whispers, "Bring me more." I was overwhelmed with emotion. The warmth of the Slender Man was washing me over with a sudden mixture of joy and dread. And then as soon as he came, he was gone. Everything changed. I dropped out of college, took over my uncle's camp, and now, every year I take a bunch of kids camping to the woods to serve the Slender Man. I'm young. I'll have the feeling that I need to do this for a long time. I haven't talked to my parents in a while. Last time I talked, they were asking me to come back home. They said they were worried for me, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave. Everything in me wanted to stay. No one remembers my uncle. My mother says she's never had a brother. No one remembers the lost children either, but I do. Anyway, this is all in the past now. Be aware where you send your kids to, or don't. Come to our camp, your kids will have the time of their life. Hello, I'm Brian, and I'm a 21-year-old college student. This story is about a scary encounter I had in the woods last summer while I was camping. I had decided to go on a 1-week camping trip in the woods near my university during our fall break. We didn't get much snow, and the weather right now was pleasant, so it seemed like the perfect time to go hiking. I took my dog Kobe with me. I was going to stay in a small cabin in the woods instead of a camping tent. During this time, I was also talking to a girl called Larissa that I had met online on Instagram. She was 19 and a sophomore in college, but we couldn't meet because we lived 2 states away from each other. We had been talking for over 4 months, and I had asked her if I could come visit her during my fall break. She declined my offer because she had to take care of her sick mother. I understood her dilemma, and she promised to meet up next year. I told Larissa everything. I even told her about my plans of going camping alone in the fall. It was particularly important to tell her that because we wouldn't be able to text while I was camping, since the woods didn't have a good internet connection. My first day camping was normal, nothing out of the ordinary. I hiked the trail and reached the cabin in the woods by 6 p.m. It was starting to get dark, so I set up camp. I made some on-the-go ramen by boiling the water on the stove I had brought with myself. I also gave Kobe some kibble. He had walked with me the whole day and was feeling somewhat tired now. "It's okay, Kobe," I said, hugging him. "We can rest now." I went outside the camp to get some wood to start a fire in the fireplace. But as soon as I opened the door, Kobe ran outside and began barking. He was barking menacingly at seemingly nothing. I was puzzled. It probably must have been a wild animal, like a deer who was just investigating the disturbance in the woods, which was us. "Come here, boy," I said, holding his collar and struggling to drag him back inside the cabin. I tried to calm him down. I held him and scratched his belly. After he had calmed down, I went out the door, closing it behind me. I got some wood from the forest and brought it back. I got the fire going in the fireplace. I calmed Kobe down and we slept snuggling in the sleeping bag so he could rest assured that everything was okay. At night, I slept too lightly. I felt like I could hear footsteps all night, but I didn't wake up because I was sure that they were just animals outside the cabin. It felt like a long night. I woke up just in time to see the sun rising. I slightly nudged Kobe and he woke with a bark. He was really on edge. I tried to snuggle with him to help him calm down a bit, and it seemed to work a little. I packed up my belongings, and by 7 a.m., we were back on the trail to the summit. Kobe and I walked along the trail for a long while without a break, but he was not the fun-loving, goofy dog that I knew. He seemed alert and scared. The big dog seemed more like a guard dog at the moment than the goofy friend that I knew. I also felt a sense of unease all the while. It felt like someone was following us. I tried to shake off that feeling, writing it off as just nerves. I was trying to have as much fun as I could. I was taking pictures of every flower or every animal I could see, all to send Larissa because she said she loved nature. After a lot of walking, Kobe and I reached the summit. I was overjoyed. I knelt down to Kobe's level and ruffled his fur. I patted his head and said, "Kobe, buddy, we made it." He seemed to understand my excitement, and he licked my face to show it. We settled down there for a bit to eat something and to just take in the beautiful scenery. I gave Kobe some of his favorite dog treats. I forgot the uneasiness of the trail and just sat there, feeling very much in the moment, and thoroughly enjoyed myself. I even took some pictures of the summit and even took pictures of me and Kobe on the summit. But I still had a growing pit in my stomach because I had to go back to the cabin through the same trail. After staying at the summit for a while, we had to go back down the trail to make it to the cabin again in time. During the hike back to the trail, I once again felt irrationally scared and uneasy. It didn't help that Kobe seemed alert too, baring his teeth and growling at nothing. I kept a death grip on Kobe's leash because I didn't want him to go chasing after whatever he was growling at. I tried to calm myself and Kobe down by even singing a song, but I stopped after it felt like someone was singing it faintly with me. I picked up my pace and somehow reached the cabin before the sun started to go down. Inside the cabin, I was scared out of my mind. Something was out there, and it was toying with me. Kobe couldn't stop barking and snarling at the door. I tried to calm him down again, but it didn't work this time. Suddenly, I started hearing someone's voice from the outside of the cabin. "Come out, honey bun. Come out, darling," said the voice on the other end. I recognized these nicknames, but I couldn't place it. I could no longer control Kobe. He charged out of the room, and I heard someone shout out in pain. I gathered the courage to walk outside the door. I had no weapon with me except for a can opener. I grabbed it and walked outside the door. The scene outside was horrifying. There was a large old man outside, about 6'2", with big muscles and a big knife in his hand. Kobe was viciously biting the man's leg while the man was trying to stab him, but couldn't move due to the pain. We had to get out of here. I lifted Kobe up and ran. All my belongings were left inside the cabin, including my phone. But all that I cared about at the moment was saving Kobe and myself. I ran randomly inside of the forest, hoping the man was injured enough to not be able to chase me. I think I ran for an hour without stopping. I eventually ran into some people camping, and I begged them for help. It was a father-son duo. As soon as I frantically told them what was happening, they got their gun and their satellite phone out. They called the police and loaded the gun to fend off any psycho man with big knives that may come limping down the trail. Thankfully, none did. Some emergency responders came our way around an hour later, and they searched the cabin and the surrounding woods for the man matching the description. They found the man armed with a knife and a gun. They also confiscated his phone and a duffel bag containing duct tape and rope. They took Kobe and I to the police station to get our statement. I was just happy to be out of those woods and in a safer environment. The cops also gave me back my belongings from the cabin. When I was in possession of my phone, I checked it to see many notifications from Larissa. She had sent me photos of the cabin I had stayed in, pictures of me on the trail with Kobe that I had not taken, and even pictures of Kobe and me sleeping. Now the familiar nicknames make sense. The man had been catfishing me as Larissa. That's why he knew I was going to go hiking. I don't know what he was planning to do with me, but it couldn't have been anything good. Safe to say, I haven't been camping since, and I don't talk to strangers online anymore. I'm Adriana, and I'm a 16-year-old high school student. I get good grades, I'm on the volleyball team, and I would say I am one of the more popular girls in high school. I think it may have something to do with me being conventionally attractive. With blue eyes, blonde hair, and a height of 5'7". I was dating Wyatt at the time. He was a junior in high school and on the football team. We had a good relationship, and he was surprisingly mature for his age. One night I got a surprise text from Wyatt on Facebook. He was supposed to be in late football practice, so I wasn't really expecting to hear from him. "Hey beautiful, I see you in the halls all the time. You're so pretty." Had it been some random weirdo texting me, I would have blocked him, but it was Wyatt. "Well, mister, you're not too bad looking yourself." I like the banter with Wyatt every time. "Are you home alone tonight?" texted Wyatt. "Well, yes. It's a shame you have football practice late today, though." "Well, I could come over," chimed the text. I was confused for a while. How could he come over? He was a star player, and he hadn't become that good by skipping practice. "Oh? But what about football practice?" I said. "I don't have football practice, silly. And I would do anything to come over, to sleep in your bed, to touch your pretty skin." I was getting creeped out. Who talks like that? He was making me very uncomfortable. "Well, I'm tired, so please don't come over tonight," I said, hoping to end the conversation. Look out, I'm already here. I was equal parts confused and horrified. I looked outside my window and saw my school janitor creepily standing on the school lawn and waving at me. I was petrified. I stepped back from the window as I heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs. I let out a little scream, and I ran to the kitchen to arm myself. I ran to my kitchen and picked up a big knife. I turned around to see the janitor standing in my living room. "Don't come near me," I yelled as harshly as I could. "Little girls don't play with knives, doll," he said as he started walking towards me. "Come to me, honey." He was walking towards me with outstretched arms. I raised the knife up, ready to defend myself if it comes to it. That is when the front door was kicked open, and in came Wyatt and his friends. They barged in, brandishing box cutters and baseball bats. They started beating up the janitor, and one of them called the police. As soon as Wyatt saw me, he dropped his baseball bat, and I dropped my knife. He came over and enveloped me in a warm embrace. "I'm so sorry, it's my fault," he said as I cried on his shoulder. The police arrived and took the janitor away. Later, Wyatt told me what had happened. His phone had been stolen during practice, and one of his friends had seen the janitor taking it. They had used the Find My iPhone app to locate the iPhone's current location, and seeing the location as my house made them feel like I was in danger, so they came in to save me. I will always be grateful to them. The janitor was fired from our school and put on probation, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe just texting someone on social media again. Always trust your gut feeling when you receive a suspicious message. My name is Naomi. I was a sophomore in high school when this story took place. Like other teens, I was also in the habit of following every trend that goes on. The Bloody Mary Challenge, the Charlie Challenge, you name it, I've done it. My friend Jennifer and I would do these challenges together. We had been childhood best friends and had shared love for the paranormal. This was apparent even from a young age, when we would dress up as Sadako and Kayako from The Grudge and the Ring movies for Halloween. Even though she was not related to me, I loved her like a sister. Jennifer was very conventionally attractive. She was very tall. She had green eyes and red hair. She was the center of attention in any public setting. She made heads turn in the hallways, and the boys used to fall for her left and right. This led to the winning of a lot of pageants. She knew how to use her good looks and capitalize on them. In fact, she was a mildly popular TikTok influencer. She had around 50,000 followers on TikTok. Her channel was focused around horror content, but her heavy following may have been attributed to her posting thirst traps from time to time. I never judged her, though. We lived in a small, isolated town where nothing good ever happened. You gotta make the best of what you have in these situations. Jennifer would get really excited when she learned about a new horror ritual on TikTok. She would even rope me into trying it out with her. I would always go along with it. I loved horror anyway, and I would do anything for my best friend. The latest trend that she had discovered was the midnight water ritual. I was always enamored with the moon and witchy stuff. Thus, I was more than happy to do this ritual alongside her. Some of her ritual videos would go viral on TikTok and get around 1 million views. She had even been a trendsetter and started some bigger trends on TikTok. She told me about the midnight water ritual when we were studying together on a weeknight. It was a school night, but we were studying late at night together. Our houses were very close together, so my father would just walk her home after we were done studying. But of course, being teenage girls, we didn't immediately say goodbye after doing our homework. We started talking about all sorts of things. From boys, to school dances, to our English teacher, Mr. Brown's new wife. Around 10 o'clock, the topic changed to her TikTok following. And that's when she started telling me about the new TikTok trend she wants to do with me. It's called the Midnight Ritual, she said, with her eyes shining as bright as the stars. It's a ritual that you have to do at midnight. You have to surround yourself with trees and bring a bucket of water with you. The moon should be hitting the surface of water. Place 5 stones around the buckets. And then you have to look at the water in the bucket. It will look just like a mirror in the moonlight. You have to look at yourself and concentrate. It is said that a spirit later possesses you, and it will make you spill all of your secrets. Think about it, your darkest secrets. Out in the open. Maybe things you didn't even know about yourself. What's so good about spilling your secrets, though? That sounds horrible, I said, in a matter-of-fact way. Oh, come on, don't be a party pooper, she said, trying to get me excited. It'll be fun. What's the catch, though? I asked. Does there have to be one? There always is. Okay, smartass, she said, chuckling. Well, the catch is that the spirit that possesses you may make you do their dirty work, and you end up doing something unspeakable. But you know nothing like that ever really happens. Come on, it'll be fun. Please? Those damn puppy eyes. I surrendered in front of her like I always did. Okay, fine, I said, trying to downplay how freaked out I was. She cheered as she hugged me. We decided to do the ritual on our monthly sleepover, which was just 2 days away. Then she took her books and my dad walked her back to her house. The next 2 days were uneventful. Nothing big happened. It was just the usual. School, clubs, cheerleading practice, family dinners, study groups. Jennifer's TikTok following grew every day. She was as popular as ever. She even got asked out by the captain of the football team, and they decided to go out on the following week. I never got asked out by any guys, but that's okay. I guess I was just meant to be the nerdy sidekick of the beautiful main character. Eventually, the days passed and our monthly sleepover came. The stage was set. There were woods next to Jennifer's house. That is where we were going to do the ritual. She had kept a bucket of water on the moon as soon as the sun went down, to charge the water, she had said. We enjoyed the sleepover like we always did. We gossiped, we cooked, and we watched some horror movies. Around 10 p.m., it was supposed to be bedtime. We told Jennifer's parents that we were going to turn in for the night. They wished us good night and went to sleep as well. We snickered as the lights turned out, and there was total silence in the house. Then we slowly sneaked out of the window. We tried to be as quiet as possible. It only took about 5 minutes to reach the bucket that Jennifer had set up. She had also insisted on bringing a tripod and her phone with her. Of course, she was going to record the ritual and post it. She set up the tripod and hit record. She started in on a hushed tone. Hello everyone. Today we will be doing the Midnight Water Challenge. I've been wanting to do this for a while now. And today I'm here with my best friend Naomi to complete this ritual. She looked ethereal, with the moonlight hitting her fiery red hair and her long white nightgown. She was beautiful. Naomi will be going first. If you want to check out what the ritual is about, you can watch another TikTok I made about this ritual. She looked at me expectantly. I stepped forward. I looked at the camera and I tried to smile, but I'm sure it just came across as an awkward grin. I walked toward the bucket and I knelt down in front of it. The film of water on top was unbroken, just like a mirror. I looked into it, looked deep into it. All I saw back was my face. I think I sat there in that position for about 5 minutes, and then I stood back up again. When I looked at Jennifer, she had a big smile on her face. Excitedly, she asked me, "Do you feel anything?" I didn't want to disappoint her, but I couldn't lie to her. No. Her face instantly fell. "But maybe you will," I said, trying to keep her spirits up. She regained her stage presence and looked into the camera. She said, "That's true. I always have felt a connection with the paranormal. Maybe I will feel something." That was a lie. She wasn't clairvoyant. Every time we have done any ritual, nothing special has happened. But I let it go. It's just a pretend personality, I told myself. She walked slowly, almost theatrically. She knelt down in front of the bucket. She stared into the water, looked down at her own pretty face. I was sure nothing was going to happen. Or she was just going to fake having been possessed. Everything stood still for what felt like an eternity. Jennifer had been sitting in that position forever. "Jennifer?" I started. Suddenly, a pair of hands emerged from the bucket and dragged Jennifer under. I screamed and I charged forward. I tried to help Jennifer. She was thrashing and kicking and trying to save herself. I tried to drag her back with all my strength, but I couldn't. The struggle was tiring. I even tried to kick the bucket from under her, but it felt like the bucket was attached to the ground with cement. I tried shouting for help, but no one would listen. I tried to run to the tripod and grab her phone, but for some reason, no matter how much I ran, it felt like I couldn't reach the phone. I was helpless. Eventually, Jennifer stopped thrashing. Her body went entirely limp. I was scared. I knew there was nothing I could do to help my friend. I ran back to my house. My parents tried to ask me what was wrong, but I ran to my room and locked myself in. My phone was being blown up by Jennifer's parents as well. I stayed in bed in the fetal position for what felt like forever. Eventually, I got a curious notification on my phone. Jennifer's body had been found in the woods along with her phone. I'm sure the video would be considered as police evidence, but someone had leaked it online. When I saw the video, I was horrified. The video showed Jennifer kneeling on top of the bucket. I saw what had happened. I ran towards her and forced her head under the water. She thrashed and kicked. She tried her best to fight back against me, but I would not budge. There was murder in my eyes. I held her head down till she stopped moving, and then I walked away. That was where the video ended.
I understood now what had happened. The midnight water ritual was real. The spirit did appear, and it had possessed me. It had exposed my greatest secret. What was my biggest secret? That I wished Jennifer would just drop dead. She treated me like I was her sidekick. She was always the prettiest, the smartest, the most charming. She always got everything. I felt like I was invisible. And the only way to be seen was to get her out of the way. Of course, I would never actually try to kill her, but the spirit had made me. The spirit knew what I wanted. Now I can hear the police sirens outside. I'm sure I'll be arrested for killing my best friend. Even though I loved her, I don't think the police will listen to my tale of TikTok possession. But hopefully you will. Please don't try the midnight water ritual or any other TikTok trend that you see online. They can be deadlier than you could ever imagine.
My name's Robert. I'm 26 years old and originally from Florida. Florida is one of the hottest states in the U.S. After our day was finished at the university, we often went to the water park nearby to cool off. This water park was one of the biggest and most popular parks in the country. Exams were approaching, and stress had drained me of energy. It was a hot summer day, and I decided to borrow my dad's car to go with my friends to the water park. I was really excited to go swimming again. I thought it would get my mind off of my exams, but who knew it would turn out to be one of the most traumatic days of my life. I convinced some of my friends to come along. They were just as excited as I was. My best friend's little brother named Julian came running towards us. He wanted to join in as well. After a deep sigh and a long period of silence glancing at each other, I told him that he could come with us this time. As happy as he was, he screamed with joy and jumped right into the back of my car. Upon reaching the park, we found it to be packed with people of all ages, from toddlers to full-grown adults. It wasn't a surprise as it was exam season for many, and just a really hot day. Basically, everyone wanted to take a break. We went to the changing rooms and heard a group of teens talking about the Colossal water slide. One of my friends also suggested that we should give this big slide a try. The Colossal was the fastest and tallest ride in the park. We changed into our swimsuits and made our way through the front entrance of the park. We went to the ticket booth for the Colossal water slide and saw the huge slide in front of us. The design of this ride was insane. It had a steep, tall slide which was closed on all four sides in the first half, and then became fluted, where the riders would go through a curvy, snake-like slide while eventually falling into a shallow pool of water at the bottom. That ride was so huge it overshadowed all of the other rides in the park. When looking at this slide, it made me anxious, but I managed to keep my composure in front of my friends. As we lined up for the slide, I saw the sign with instructions. Anyone aged 16 or older with a minimum height of 60 inches was allowed to enter the slide. Anyone who didn't meet these minimum requirements were not permitted to ride. I thought to myself, this slide is strictly prohibited for anyone younger or shorter. I immediately looked at my best friend's little brother, Julian, who was only 13. I mean, he was larger for his age and may be able to pass as a 16-year-old. The whole group started climbing, and I anxiously followed. We were seated in a tube of 4 people and were told to take hold of the handlebars. The lifeguard noticed that I was scared and assured me that the ride was going to be perfectly safe. It was a slow start and my friends were screaming and shouting joyfully, while I was too scared to even open my mouth. We were slowly moving to the steep portion of the ride, and my heart started beating faster and faster. We slid tremendously fast through that portion, and I could see a light nearing us. My eyes were wide open from the shaky ride,
and my body was still as a tomb. Once we were out of the first half, we drifted rapidly through the curves to the point where the tube almost lost control. It made my stomach churn. It was getting harder and harder to keep hold of the handlebars. Suddenly, we hit a curve with such a sturdy force that Julian went flying into the air and off the slide. We yelled out his name in agony. I looked back and saw his body just falling down. My eyes couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this. My body went numb. While the ride kept going on, the last seconds felt like ages as we dropped into the pool at the end. We jumped off our tube and started running towards the point of the incident. We heard a lot of screaming from the people reacting to the terror that played out in seconds. I saw on the concrete floor a squashed body, which I knew to be my best friend's little brother. The employees cleared a path for the ambulance, and we were blocked by the park staff when we tried to approach the scene. My best friend was in total shock and almost passed out from what just happened. The paramedics arrived and took control of the situation. I knew there was no way he could have survived to drop that high. The incident was so overwhelming that I went into a state of shock as well, and the next thing I remember was Julian's death being announced on national television. The ride was later investigated and shut down for good. That event left me traumatized and still haunts me to this day. There's nothing I could have done. I was powerless. The feeling that I was somehow responsible for it makes things even worse. I keep thinking to myself, am I the one to blame for Julian's death? Should I have stopped him? I never thought this is how the day would end. For now, I know that whenever I see a water slide, I'll be reminded of my little friend in heaven. Story 2. The next story happened in a water park around 2013. My name is Todd, and I'm 30 years old. Back when I was a teen, I used to work in a water park as a lifeguard. People think being a lifeguard is easy, but it's not. Because the experiences I'm about to share with you will make you change your mind. In my first year, I used to operate the wave pool alongside 2 other lifeguards. When summer arrived, the park used to be loaded with people and inevitably the wave pool. The pool was approximately 4 foot deep, and there was a height limit to who could take part in the ride. One day, just after my shift began, the pool was congested. After a few minutes of starting the wave machine, I noticed a lot of yelling and screaming. Something was off. A person from the pool approached me and told me he saw the water turning red at the other side. I quickly stopped the ride and jumped in to check it out. Upon arriving, I saw an unconscious young boy with his face covered in blood. He had been smashed into the side wall of the pool as a result of the area being crowded. I pulled him out and had someone call an ambulance. He was taken to the nearest hospital. 2 days later, I was told by one of my colleagues that the young boy suffered from 2 broken ribs, broken vertebrae, and a broken nose, and that he was bound to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Another event that comes to my mind was one day when I was operating one of the tallest rides in the park. My job was to help people into the ride, and by giving them a slight tug. Then came this young man with a girl, who was presumably his girlfriend. To try to impress his lady, he ignored all of my instructions and proceeded to go headfirst into the slide. It did not end well for him. He crashed his head in one of the curves, which knocked him unconscious and sent him flying off the slide, and luckily he was caught by the safety net. He was taken to the hospital, but later died due to brain damage. His family tried to sue us, but lost the case, with the man's girlfriend and a few others who were waiting in line being witnesses of how I tried to stop him. But he kept resisting. I can also recall, in the kids' pool, there is usually no need for a lifeguard, as the parents keep an eye on their children. One time, a couple came running towards me and said their daughter was missing. I began to search and noticed a dark spot in the big pool where the parents came from. I quickly dived in and pulled her out as fast as I could and began CPR. God knows how long she had been down there. Her lips turned blue and a hefty amount of water was pouring out of her mouth and nose. She was not showing any signs of life. Help arrived, but it was already too late. I've seen too many deaths. I was going crazy. I left that job and never thought of taking one like that again. My name is Lisa. I'm a 23-year-old college student from the South of America. In the next story I'm going to tell you about a night 3 years ago. A night with two of my best friends that ended up in a true horror scene. Make sure you stick around to the end and listen carefully. You might learn something from this experience. I was 20 at the time and had just gotten admitted into college. I was successful making good friends within the first few days. I met two other girls. Their names were Jane and Anna. We were all close in age, shared a lot of similar interests, and were very bright students. Anna was the strangest one of the three of us. She was always telling stories of ghosts and the paranormal. I never believed in her stories, and usually just kind of laughed it off. It was just a regular, boring day at college. My friends and I attended our physics lecture, and the class was dismissed with 3 assignments for homework, adding more boredom to the already very boring day. We went to the cafeteria and sat around a table to start our usual conversation. "What a boring day," said Jane. "Couldn't agree more," said Anna. "If there was just something that could make it exciting, like the principal's office catching on fire," she continued. "Or the chemistry department collapsing," added Jane. We all sat there and had a good laugh. Then I received a phone call from my father. I answered. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetie. I just wanted to let you know your mother and I are going out of town tonight. I'll put the house key in the plant pot next to the front door." "I'll place all your favorite snacks in your room," said Mom from the background. "Goodbye, sweetie. Take care of yourself," they both continued. "Goodbye. Have fun and be safe. I love you," I replied as I hung up the phone. "You guys won't believe it, but the day just got better," I said excitedly. "How exactly? What could make this boring day better?" my friends asked. "My parents are out of town for tonight, so are you guys down for a sleepover?" "Oh my God, yes! We would love that!" Both readily agreed. We attended the rest of our classes and happily left for home on what seemed to be the most boring day that turned exciting. It was a fine, cloudy evening and a pleasant walk home. Once we got to my house, we made ourselves comfortable and were prepared to have an amazing time. I grabbed all the snacks from my room, and all of us went straight into the living room, where we put on a movie. The movie eventually ended, and then we started playing a game of Truth or Dare, at the request of Jane. After a half an hour of secrets being revealed, confessions being made to our crushes, and us girls attempting stupid dares, I got dared to attempt the Bloody Mary challenge. "What's that?" I questioned Anna. "I did some research on Mary. Legend has it is that the spirit of the bloodthirsty Queen Mary the First of England still roams freely in this world. You can summon her by chanting Bloody Mary at a mirror in a dimly lit room 3 times. After the 3 chants, the spirit will then appear in the mirror to claw your eyes out. Death will follow, and some say she will drive you insane, or pull you into the mirror, never to be seen again. It's still a mystery who Bloody Mary really is," she replied. Me, being the fearless, brave girl, laughed it off saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous. It's just a children's story. Grow up, Anna. You really believe in that myth?" "If you're so firm on believing it's a children's story, why don't you do it?" said Jane, scornfully, totally believing what Anna said. "Fine, I'll do it," I replied. "I'm going to satisfy your cravings for excitement, don't you worry." "Lisa, think again before you attempt to do this so willingly. This ritual is flirting with danger," said Anna, grabbing me from the shoulder. Lisa, I believe it's real. So do you really want to do it? I was just testing your courage, she continued with a quavering voice. Yeah, whatever, I replied while taking her hand off my shoulder. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a candle and lit it. I proceeded to lock myself in the bathroom with the lights turned off and began to chant at the mirror. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, scaling up my voice after every chant. For a moment, even I was afraid that something might happen because of the authenticity in Anna's voice. But nope, there was nothing. I jokingly let out a dramatic scream just to spook my friends waiting outside. When I opened the bathroom door, my friends were staring at me with nervous faces, as if I were a ghost. I laughed hysterically at them and said, "Got you good, didn't I?" They both then said, "Let us give it a try. You must have missed something." "Fine, go on," I replied. Jane pulled the candle out of my hands and rushed into the bathroom and repeated the ritual to try and summon Bloody Mary. We waited outside. I wasn't nearly as scared and excited as my friends were, as I thought to myself how stupid my friends were to believe such a ridiculous story. I told Anna about how she actually made me kind of scared for a moment there, as I felt some truthfulness in her words earlier. We heard Jane do the ritual, and then the bathroom door opened with Jane standing there, not amused even a bit. "You're right, Lisa. It doesn't work," she muttered. "What did I tell you guys?" I responded while giggling at their disappointment. The three of us sat down for another round of truth or dare, and suddenly, the lights in my house started flickering. We all sprang up, frightened. "It was probably just because of the heavy rain outside, guys," I said nervously, trying to calm everyone down. But the flickering got worse and worse, which was then accompanied by a ghostly screeching sound. All three of us were petrified. Anna's face turned white. She slowly lifted her trembling hand and pointed at what I thought was me, and in the dullest voice whispered underneath her breath, "Behind you." I suddenly felt a cold breath on my neck. It sent shivers down my spine. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to look behind me. There stood a woman with a deformed face. She had long, messy hair and nails, with blood-stained hands glaring at me. I froze in place due to the absolute horror of how she looked. "She's real!"
"Who's called upon the ancient spirit?"
The spirit of Mary roared in a demonic tone. I kept glued in place for a moment, but then the adrenaline kicked in, and I let out the loudest scream of my life and began running, and so did Jane. Before I could reach the door, all of the house started immensely shaking. I fell to the ground just to turn around and see the horror of that bloody face. Her face started rotating back to look towards me. I felt my body numb from the fear. I saw our furniture and utensils flying all over the house. Bloody knives were flying all over the living room. I heard Jane screaming from the other side of the house. We saw Anna getting grabbed by the legs as she was running towards me. And in the heat of the moment, we solely thought about ourselves, with only one thing in mind. How was I going to escape this nightmare? With no care in the world for one another, I rushed to the front door, grabbed the handle, and managed to get out. As I peered into the house, I happened to catch a glimpse of Jane as she cleared the threshold of the back door and lunged herself into the yard. Still in shock and terror-stricken, I yelled to Jane, "Where's Anna?" Jane's eyes met with mine, saturated with fear and confusion, as we heard a terrifying scream. We redirected our attention from one another to the living room, which was Anna's last known location, and saw the most horrendous sight. It was Anna getting devoured by Bloody Mary. I let out a scream. Jane was running towards me outside. The both of us cried, watching our best friend getting killed right in front of our eyes. Our neighbors rushed to our aid after hearing all the screaming and shouting. Mary disappeared, and we were taken into one of the neighboring houses. They tried to get us to speak, but we were in no state of doing so. My neighbor, who was an elderly woman, allowed us to stay with her for the night, but we couldn't sleep. due to the constant fear of Mary coming after one of us. We were the ones who summoned her after all. God knows how that night passed. When my parents arrived the next morning, I uncontrollably took hold of my mother, crying and unable to let go. Our house was sealed after the police investigated the incident. They recovered what was left of Anna's body. Jane and I were questioned regarding the events that took place that night. We tried to tell everything that happened, but no one believed the urban legend. We stayed in a hotel room for a few nights, and I begged my parents that we should move out of town, far away from here. My parents got a house shifting service to get all of our stuff packed up and moved. After attending Anna's funeral, we left for our new home. I have started attending college here, but I have not been able to focus on my studies that well. The once bright student was now gone. Weird how one incident can change your entire life. I keep in touch with Jane regarding my studies, but the topic of that night, or Anna, never gets brought up. I still to this day have not recovered from the incident, and I try to avoid every mirror I come across. That night has made me develop a phobia of mirrors and candles, still afraid that the scary woman might come after me eventually. No idea what she was seeking vengeance for. I went from a strong and brave girl to the weakest and most introvert in just one night. I keep thinking to myself, am I the one to blame for Anna's death? The thought that maybe I could have grabbed her when I escaped still lingers. I never thought that Anna's story of the Bloody Mary woman would end up like this. I wonder if there are more people where this scary ritual went wrong. For now, I know I will never try this again. I have learned to take every story seriously and don't try any rituals. You never know which ones will come true and which ones won't.
My name is Jack, and I'm 34 years old. Back in 2010, I met this beautiful woman, Marissa, who is now my wife. We hit it off, and by late 2011, we were living together in a small apartment in town. She was aware of this condition in which I dealt with, and she experienced sleep paralysis later on as well. So she understood my condition and how scared I used to get after my sleep paralysis. So we were living together for a couple of months now, and I experienced sleep paralysis for a long extent of time. I'd say maybe a month or so. I wake up one morning, unable to move. This is nothing I'm not used to dealing with. So I lay in bed next to my wife, who woke up at the same time as me, and she held my hand and smiled at me. I assumed she had no clue that I was paralyzed at the moment, but I thought to myself, I'll snap out of this soon enough. That's when I realized something was wrong. Way wrong. Something way darker was going on here than I originally thought. Because beyond my wife, I could see a dark, shadowy figure standing at the corner of the room. I couldn't even move or speak to tell my wife to protect me from that dark figure. But my wife figured out I was seeing something in the distance, as my eyes showed fear. That dark figure in the corner started expanding, more and more, to the point it was all over the room. Now at that moment, I was freaking the hell out. I've dealt with similar things before, but what the heck was this? With the help of my wife, I fought really hard to come out of it, and I successfully did. This one, though, really got to me. It messed with my head, to be honest, and to this day, it still gives me chills. So which one was really my wife? That's when the one lying next to me began to dig into my hands with hers, and her nails turned into claws. The smile on her face grew bigger and bigger, to the point it consumed almost all of her face. Her eyes became hollow and black. A smile took over her entire face, and I began to feel fingers coming out of my bed, tickling my legs, and then trying to hold them down and pull me down into the bed. I fought really hard, and I came out of it like always. I have a baby monitor video on my nightstand by my bed. It shows my 2-year-old daughter asleep in her crib in the other room.
Last night, I fell asleep laying on my side. After about 2 hours, my eyes open, and I can clearly see the baby monitor on my nightstand, but I can't move or speak. I'm fully paralyzed. After a few minutes of staring at the video monitor with a nervous, disturbing feeling, I see something walk up to the side of my daughter's crib. It was at least 7 feet tall and looked like a silhouette of a praying mantis human morph. I couldn't see the details, just its shape and size. It bends over the side of the crib and its face gets very close to my daughter's face. I try my hardest to move my body or yell in order to snap out of it, but I can't. It stood there, bent over the side of the crib, its face less than a foot away from my daughter's. It stared at her for at least 60 seconds. Then suddenly, its head turned and looked at me at the camera. I can feel it watching me. It knows I'm paralyzed. At this point, I'm panicking inside, trying my hardest to kick and scream, but I just can't. A few seconds later, my wife lying in bed next to me shakes me and wakes me up. She woke up because our daughter just started screaming and crying on the baby monitor, which is very strange because our daughter never wakes up in the middle of the night and cries. We hop out of bed and run into her room. She's terrified. We stay in there with her until she's comfortable enough to fall asleep, and then we head back to bed and fall back asleep. An hour later, the same exact thing happens. Again, I go into paralysis and see the same figure on the monitor with our daughter. And then my wife wakes me up because our daughter is screaming again. I go into my daughter's room and pick her up. I had to ensure this stops, so I tuck her in my bed to make sure she sleeps safe. She didn't scream after that. The next day, right after lunch, I'm putting our daughter down for her daily regular nap, but this time, she doesn't want to take the nap and starts crying. She says, scary monster, over and over. That's the first time she's ever said that. In fact, it's the first time she's even said the word monster. I've been having sleep paralysis all of my life, and each time there's always some sort of dark figure watching, stalking me, wishing to do me harm. What if they've been real this whole time, and the only ones who can see them are me, and now apparently our daughter? What if these demons I'm creating in my mind while I'm in sleep paralysis are beginning to manifest in real life? A piercing shriek rang through the air. It woke Marissa up. She woke up with a deprived mind. She slowly opened her eyes, groggily, and encountered darkness. The shriek continued, and Marissa internally cringed. Attempting to investigate, she slowly stood up, but found herself unable to, as her arms had no strength along with the rest of her body. She suddenly heard the beating of her heart echoing loudly. She panicked and yet again attempted to move, but similar to before, she still had no bodily control. Furthermore, she realized her powerlessness and believed it was due to stress. 10 minutes went by. Marissa still stared at the utter darkness. Strange shapes appeared in front of her, a trick played by the mind. She began to panic again. What the hell, she thought. Once again, she put in all of her effort to move, which yielded no result. Marissa stood in the field of nothingness, unable to perceive and unable to observe. She was powerless. The void had devoured everything, leaving only her behind, leaving her to suffer, to repent. Suddenly, an agent of light managed to successfully pierce through the veil of darkness. It shone like the sun in the void, bringing forth joy within Marissa. She exclaimed in praise in her mind. She rejoiced, for she had not been forgotten. However, uneasiness crept into her time of joy. She still could not move. She still had no control. Fear began to build up. Her heart began to beat more rapidly. The light was now close enough to be clearly observed. But no matter how much effort she invested into seeing it, her mind could not grasp it. Her mind couldn't grasp its shape, its size, and its general properties. "Be not afraid," said the light. "I have come to offer freedom. I have come to offer your reward. Do you accept?" With no hesitation, without any will, Marissa's mouth moved. She uttered the words of confirmation.
The being of light had been granted permission, and Marissa lost all control of herself. She didn't notice the terms of condition laid out in front of her to escape her mini hell, and failed to understand what permission she now granted this being. This was the first time my wife ever experienced something like this. I started going to a therapist later on, but that didn't end well. Because one day during my therapy session, I was asleep in bed on my back. It was a light sleep. The smell of the human breath, the warmth, not necessarily foul, but definitely present, right beside me, to my left. The breath eased against my face and neck. Again, not a foul breath, but an undeniable presence of life. I opened my eyes, but I was frozen. It was sleep paralysis. I actually experienced it regularly in the past, as I told you. Anyway, from the periphery of my vision, I could see something. The curtains to my right were open, and moonlight shone through, exposing the outline of a bald head to my left. It was right beside me. Now I couldn't move my head. Obviously, I could only look straight towards the roof, but I could see him from the corner of my eye. Usually when I have this paralysis, I snap out of it relatively quickly, about 40 seconds. Well, this time was no different. My senses finally came to me. I began to rotate my head towards the bald man, but as I did, he got lower and lower. I turned my head slowly, and every degree I turned, the man got lower. Lower and lower until he was underneath my bed. So there I sat, upright on my bed, staring out where the man had sat. The room was dimly lit, so it was safe to say my anxiety levels were pretty high. I thought I knew it was just paralysis, until I heard the breathing again from under my bed. Furthermore, I am frozen on my bed, frozen in fear. I grabbed my disposable camera, which sat on my windowsill, and the therapist snapped his notebook shut and capped his pen. Jack, quite frankly, I'm not a paranormal investigator, nor do I believe in such kind of sleep paralysis, the therapist says. I get up into a sitting position. I quickly try to take a picture, but the therapist puts his hand down in anger. You said you would hear me out. You gave me your word, I said. The therapist hit a buzzer, which sat on his desk, and a tall security guard entered the room. Please escort my client out of the room. He has shown a tremendous tendency for violence, and I will be discharging him. I kicked and screamed and wriggled until the door shut, and the therapist was left in silence. He slicked his hair back and rose to his feet. As he made his way towards his desk, he noticed something laying beside the door on the ground. A disposable photo. He walked over, bent down, and snapped it up, turning it around in his hand, and he saw it. Oh dear God. I lost all connections with the guy after that. Eventually there would be shadows. First one, then more. So came the voices, and eventually I started feeling hands on me, touching me, and strangling me. That was the worst, when the hands would slowly creep up my back to my neck and start to squeeze until I couldn't breathe anymore. I would wake up out of breath, sweaty and frightened. It was during one of these strangling events things changed. I always fought back, or tried to, as that was the natural thing to do. But then one day it just occurred to me, I should stop fighting. Just see what happened. Maybe for some reason I envisioned a brick wall, and I focused on that one brick in the middle. My body started to relax, and after a short while, the squeezing of my neck started to ease up, until it eventually stopped, completely. I woke up breathing normally, feeling relaxed. I can't remember any more details, but from then on, I never fought back, and it was not long after it all stopped completely. Likewise, I have not had any sleep paralysis ever since. Maybe I just outgrew it. After that, I told my wife to do the same.
and my family never experienced anything like that again. My daughter slept peacefully. I don't know, but if you've experienced something similar, it might be worth trying for you too. I was an 18-year-old girl living in Seattle. A fun fact about me is that I resemble my grandmother a lot. So back in April 1999, my grandmother told me stories which made me paranoid, for which I can still hear stuff to this day. I'm going to tell you about a night that I can never erase from my memory. Make sure you stick to the end to find out what I saw that day. My grandmother was supposed to be taken to do some shopping with my aunt. They did this quite often, as their neighborhoods were right next to each other. My grandmother was too old to drive. However, my aunt woke up that day with a really bad migraine, and she called my grandmother to say that she wouldn't be able to take her shopping that day. My grandmother says that this is no problem, and that she will take the bus instead. Although my grandmother lives in a relatively quiet area, she still had to cross a few streets to get to the bus stop. Before she goes shopping, I get a call from my grandmother telling me about her day. It started off as a good and normal conversation until she said that she always hears loud footsteps at night, which felt like someone was walking under her bed. That kind of creeped me out, but I thought maybe they were just hallucinations, as she was old. Coming back to the time when she planned to go shopping, while crossing one of these streets, a car comes around and strikes my grandmother, knocking her to the ground. She is rushed to the hospital. The ambulance workers told me later that all my grandmother kept saying was, "It was him. I can hear his footsteps." Before they reached the hospital, my grandmother lost consciousness. While other family members around the area got the word and gathered in the hospital's waiting room, unfortunately, my grandmother never regained consciousness and passed away not long after my mother arrived in town. My father and I took some time off of work and school to help make the funeral arrangements. 2 days went by since the funeral, and we were now back in our hometown. We are still shocked. None of us could have imagined that this would be our last trip to Grandma. Fast forward to a few months later, in mid-August. I'm 19 years old at this time. My parents decided to spend the day at the local fair, so I'm home by myself. It's a nice, sunny day outside. The phone in my room was one of those old-fashioned rotary models. It had one of those famous, distinctive ringtones that you sometimes hear in old movies. It was sometime after lunch when the music was interrupted by the sound of that telephone ringing. I paused my music to answer the call. There was something not quite right about the ringtone. It was noticeably slower. I answered the phone. Yeah? I expected it to be my parents asking me to go grab them from the local fair, but all I heard was the sound of static on the other end. Again, I said, "Hello?" Over the static, I heard my grandmother's voice reply, "Hello." I was stunned and kind of scared at the moment, too. I replied, "Grandma, is that you?" There was only static for a few seconds, and then I heard, "Let me walk, dear." And then the line went dead. I hung up the receiver and just stood there looking at the phone. I'm a little freaked out at this point, so I put the music back on, and I tried to put the pieces of the last 10 seconds together. The strange ringtone, the static, Grandma's voice. Was someone trying to pull an elaborate prank on me? I try to push my thoughts to one side. An hour later, the phone rings again. This time, however, there is no drawn-out ringtone, nor was there any static when I put the receiver up to my ear. The voice was indeed one of my parents asking me to pick them up from the local fair. This confirmed me that the phone call I received earlier was definitely something out of the ordinary. I didn't tell anyone about the bizarre phone call for years. I thought it was just best to keep this experience to myself forever, but sometimes things don't always go as planned. 10 years go by, and we are now in the year 2009. By this time, my parents had moved to the same area that my grandmother used to live in. I plan to shift in with them as well. I'm chilling out in the lounge area, watching TV, when my mother asks me, "Has Travis told you about Granny's ghost yet?" I reply, no. What's that about? Travis is my brother, by the way, who moved in with us as well. So she then relays a story to me about a freaking encounter involving my brother, Travis, and our deceased grandmother. His experience happened 4 years after mine, which was in 2003. This is what happened. Travis was home alone one night, sleeping in his bed, when something caused him to wake up. Although it was dark, he saw a ghostly, slightly transparent figure wearing a blue dress with boots on, standing at the top of his bed. He looks at the apparition and notices the face of our grandmother. The figure then spoke to him. "There's someone in the lounge. I need its boots." Travis replied, "Okay, Grandma, I'll go check it out." The apparition then vanished. My brother gets out of his bed and walks the short distance to the lounge room. There's nobody there. He then goes back to his bedroom and falls asleep as if nothing ever happened. How did he manage to keep his composure during this experience? I would have flipped out big time. Listening to that story resulted in me confessing to my mother about the phone call I received 10 years prior. I thought she would be sad, or even a little upset that I kept it to myself for so long. Instead, she was excited and actually smiled, and she wanted to know every detail. My brother and I have not seen the ghost of my grandmother since we have concluded that strange phone call was potentially our grandmother. So time just passes by, and one day, all of my family moves into our grandparents' house. I was given the room of my deceased grandmother. I took it without any hesitation, since that room was kept pretty tidy. Just as a few days went by, I started hearing soft footsteps from under the bed. I brushed it off, thinking it must be someone just walking outside the room. Suddenly, I remember my grandma's call, in which she said she heard loud footsteps from under her bed. Shivers went down my spine. I quickly turned on the lights and looked under the bed. Nothing was there. I eventually went back to sleep. However, the very next day, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they were louder than before. I got up, checked the hallway just to find out nobody was there, and everyone was asleep. It must have been something my grandmother was talking about. My suspicions got confirmed. As I remembered the ambulance worker, he told me that my grandmother kept saying, "I can hear his footsteps." I tried sleeping on the opposite side of the bed, but the sound of footsteps didn't end. Furthermore, I was too afraid to check under the bed this time. I put on my headphones and went to sleep. I told my family the next day about what had been happening. My mother started enjoying this, since she likes to talk about Grandma and her horror stories. I had to prove that something was going on. I made Travis sleep in that room, and I slept in his room. The next morning, I asked Travis if he heard the footsteps, but he said that he didn't. What were those footsteps? Were they only obsessed with me, just like they were with Grandma? It started creeping me out even more. These footsteps were getting louder, day by day, and I had to turn up my music so I couldn't hear them. I tried to ignore it instead of being scared, until the day came that I was reading a book and my bed started shaking. I couldn't say anything or even scream due to the fear I had at the time. I rushed out of the room, all sweaty. Everyone looked at me like I just saw a ghost, but it was real. I experienced something similar. I slept in Travis's room that night. Likewise, I couldn't bear going back to that room. The next morning, I moved the bed to the other side of the room and tried to find out what was going on. I slowly reached down to the floor where the bed was placed, and I tried knocking on the wooden floor. It was hollow and felt like there was a room under that area. I couldn't see a knob or an entrance area. but I had to break that wood to find out what made me afraid. I looked for a loose piece, broke the wood, and made a hole in the ground. I could see a path going straight to somewhere. I grabbed my flashlight and took a hammer with me. As I reached the bottom of that area, I could only hear footsteps and shaking noises. I was really afraid of these. I shouldn't have gone alone there, but I still made that foolish mistake. A few minutes passed by, and I was just figuring out what that place was. Suddenly, many ghosts appeared in front of me. I could see my grandmother in these ghosts as well, but those ghosts had 4 legs and no hands. All of their feet had worn big boots. Just as they started walking towards me, a huge number of loud footsteps came, and due to the fear, I couldn't scream. I kept screaming internally, "Grandma, no!" But that didn't matter. I ran as fast as I could back, climbing my way to the room, but it was difficult as my body was shaking intensely from the fear. Before I could feel those footsteps devouring me, I jumped out of the hole and came out of the room, just in time. I couldn't move or speak at that point. I slowly heard those footsteps fading away. I looked towards the hole I dug, but it wasn't there anymore. The bed was suddenly back in the right place, as if nothing had happened. It was just me, lying on the floor, unable to even move. I became sick for a week or so, still not being able to sleep or speak. What were those things? Why could I only hear those sounds? Why were those things only obsessed with me? After going home after a week, I made my parents look under the floor of the room, and when they finally did, there was nothing there. Nothing. Even though they didn't see what I saw, I convinced my parents to move out of the house and sell it. We eventually did, and moved to another city to create peace. But ever since then, I still had a hard time sleeping. Any footsteps around my room reminds me of what happened that day. Welcome to your next Chills Before Sleep. Let's go back to my school career. I had a full-on mindset on getting a bachelor's degree at the time. Furthermore, I was going for the 4-year degree, but I ended up having difficulties in the degree because of reasons stated later. I was a 22-year-old female then, and I'm 35 now. All of this started when my 2nd year in college began. I started off really strong in academics and got fantastic grades. I lived down the street in an apartment-type room by myself. I prefer that myself, actually. Anyway, I would walk to the college in the morning and usually get a ride from the other students that lived in the same complex. In the afternoon of some day, well halfway through the first quarter, there was a guy that I met through one of my friends that I saw in the morning. Her name was Kate. Kate brought him to campus, and he didn't go to the college yet. She was getting him set up, but he really couldn't say 2 consecutive words to me, since he looked socially awkward. I thought maybe college would help him with that. I was even willing to help him break out of that shell if he wanted that. He had different plans, though. After he got enrolled, Kate started bringing him to his classes since he didn't have a ride. I congratulated him on his enrollment, and that was my biggest mistake ever. Apparently, Kate forgot to tell me that he had a very obsessive personality. He thanked me, but I guess he wanted to show his appreciation some other way. Later on, I kept seeing him between classes and all over the place without Kate. Up until now, he'd been attached to her at the hip. He came up next to me every chance that he got, ultimately, to hang on me. I told him to back off, that I wasn't comfortable having him do that. He stopped when I told him to, but he wouldn't remember my preferences. I'd have to tell him each time. That was until Kate saw it and told him. She scolded him hard for it. After that, he didn't hang on me, but he did sit there and stare at me with blank eyes, with zero expressions. It used to really creep me out. It was really unnerving how he would just blankly stare at me with his eyes open. He wouldn't say anything or add anything to our conversations. I don't know what was wrong with this dude, but he wasn't handicapped, or I probably would have had more patience with him. After Kate scolded him, he stopped hanging around me much anymore. It happened in intervals. First, he completely stopped touching me. I was fine with that, and I'd be okay if that was the only thing that changed. He then started sitting very far away from me when in social situations. After that, he started getting further and further away from me. I was okay with that if he didn't want to be friends, but that wasn't his plan. He planned to stalk me. Over the course of the rest of the quarters of college, I started noticing some of my stuff went missing. I found out what he was doing with these things when Kate told me as she was driving him home one day. He pulled out my jacket from his bag that she recognized as mine. She didn't immediately say anything, but he sat in her back seat and sniffed it. Kate told me that she called him a freak and took it away from him. He tried to claim the jacket as his, but she knew better because she knew I've been wearing that jacket ever since the start of college. Basically, I was wearing that jacket for a few years now. Busted, dude. After Kate gave me my jacket back, I washed it. After Kate scolded him, he stopped stealing my stuff. But that did not stop that creep. It motivated him more. He then began taking pictures of me. I knew by this time that he did like me, but doing stuff like this isn't the way to show it. Taking pictures of someone is just creepy behavior. He really tried hard to be creepy at that time. But I drew the line when I had to walk home one night, due to leaving after everyone else did. I had to stay late for an assignment. The creepy person came there as well. I was sitting in the library studying and completing my assignment. Suddenly, my sixth sense started tingling. I knew someone was staring at me. There weren't many people at the library at the time, so I could hear the smallest of movements too. I turned around, and I could see the quick movements of someone. I immediately knew it was him. I got up with my bag and started walking towards another table. I could feel someone was following me. I just sat at the table where the only few students left were studying. That was a point of relief, since he left me at that point. Coming back to the time when I was walking home from the library, my sixth sense tingled again. I knew he must have been waiting for me someplace else, and he was. I just started walking towards my apartment. He followed me home. As I entered my building, I saw him trying to run away from being seen. I called Kate to come up and get him, and tell him not to be following me home like that. When I told her this, she was absolutely furious. She came dangerously flying into the complex to scold him some more, and to get him out of there. But as I predicted, he didn't stop there. The next day, his attitude completely changed. He was no longer the wonder-filled he had been. He was angry and sulky. I could definitely tell what she had done to him. He saw me and just flipped out and left. I really didn't care, since he put himself in that position. So he pretty much stayed away from me, until somewhere around the final quarter. That's when I noticed him outside by my window hanging out at night. He was stalking me again. I was over this, and I wasn't going to Kate this time. I went to the college. I contacted the college and told them that he was stalking me, and I didn't feel safe anymore. However, they made excuses for him. They did nothing at all. I went into the control office the next day and told them I didn't need someone stalking me if I was going to continue going to college here. They told me to just quit if I was going to threaten the college in any way. That wasn't a threat. That was a conditional statement. They should have known that. Also, who am I threatening with this? Not attending anymore? That really only affects me. So I ended up having to leave the college a little after more fighting with this. They wouldn't help me, and neither would the police. After I called the police on this matter, when he got weirder and worse, the college felt offended and started asking me to leave. At that time, I had my full focus on the 4-year degree, so I was basically forced to stay in college for a few more weeks. But with the circumstances, I decided to change my college, where I could continue on the same page in peace. However, that cost me a lot of money, and I had to work part-time to cover that up. After switching college, I was relieved to notice that the stalker was not active anymore. But here's when things got even creepier. I was studying at home and I heard my mail coming through my door. I opened the envelope and was shocked for a few seconds. It was a note that said, "You can run away from college, but you can't run from me." I almost cried and was so scared. At this moment, I realized he was stalking me outside my house. I ran to my bed and couldn't sleep all night, afraid of the boy who was standing in front of my house, looking inside with his creepy dark eyes. I had to leave in the morning for my new college, and again, he followed me there. At that time, he always tried to get close to me on the way. I even saw blood marks and scars on his face and arms. I realized that there is a chance he is going to hurt me. That's why I always tried to be around people who would act as a shield for me. I'm so glad he couldn't enroll in my classes, or he would have entered those as well. But as he was a student too, nobody stopped anyone at the library. I couldn't ever study or complete my assignment in the library, so I had to spend extra time in the classes to cover those up. As I mentioned earlier, changing colleges cost me a lot of money, and I had to work part-time to cover that up. I decided to join as a cashier at a local supermarket, where I would have a 6-hour shift from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. on weekdays. Somehow, he even came there to stalk me. As I was right beside the market's window, he used to spend hours standing outside, stalking me with dirty, almost looking like bloody clothes. This wasn't a once or twice per week basis. It was every day. After my shift ended, I walked home the same route as usual. It slowly went dark, and I felt that it was beginning to rain a little. Suddenly, it felt like I was not alone again, almost if someone was behind me. I quickly picked up a rock to defend myself and looked around to see if anyone was approaching me, but to my surprise, no one was there. I continued walking home a little faster, and I was relieved to see my house in the distance. I opened my door and stepped inside of my house. When I looked into the living room, my heart dropped for a moment. All of my furniture was moved to a different place, and my house didn't look like it used to. Someone has been in my house, or worse, there's still someone in my house. I knew it was him. I was mad and scared at the same time. I panicked and ran all over my house to see if the boy was in my house. I checked every corner and closet, but he was nowhere to be found. One day I had it. I had to confront him or even knock out his teeth. When I was coming back from my shift, I saw him following me again. I just turned back and saw him staring at me with blank eyes. His eyes were wide open, not even blinking. I angrily rushed to him and pushed him so he would fall on the ground. I succeeded in doing that, and he fell to the ground, but he kept his eyes on me constantly, not speaking a word. Even on the ground, his eyes were wide open and looked full black. I noticed that something fell from his pocket. Upon looking closer, I found out that it was my extra keys to my apartment. That was a seriously creepy moment for me. I took those keys, ran back to the house, and shut the door worryingly. God knows how many times he had entered my apartment and stalked me from there. Can't even think about it. I changed my lock and my keys the very next day. I was expecting that he would show up the next day, but he did not. However, I always had a feeling that someone was watching me. I knew who. I just had to ignore him for only a few months, because that was my last semester for the 4-year degree. Just as I finished my degree with not so great results, I moved back home and never looked back. Once I moved back, Kate stopped talking to me, and I never saw my stalker again. I planned on going back to the city in a few years to visit a few friends or discuss some stuff with Kate, but as time got closer, I stopped caring about going back, and I started looking for work. I found myself a decent little job, and I was able to pay my bills. It still burns me up that Kate's friend was allowed to get away with stalking. He even had a major role in disrupting my degree. It is 10 years later, but those black eyes are still haunting me in my sleep. This experience crushed me, and I never walk alone to my apartment in my hometown as well. Every time the mail comes for me, my heart drops. It is hard to forget, and I can't sleep tight anymore.
Ready for your next chills before sleep? Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for us to provide you with more scary stories. Let us know what you think and don't forget to enable all notifications. Be the first ones to get the chills.